Loud birds. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Medieval Storytime with the creative Contessa. I am dressed in my 15th century Italian underwear because we are going to be reading a story from Giovanni Boccaccio's Il Decamerone, the Decameron, and this is a saucily bawdy tale that is not overtly bawdy, and it's filled with euphemism, and it's lots of fun. But the first thing I'm going to do is get dressed while we wait for everyone to join us for this morning's medieval story time. So where is everyone watching from today? And if we make it through the tale from Il Decamerone with time to spare, I have some other readings lined up that will offer an insight into daily life in the Middle Ages, into the way that people ate, into the way that people bathed, into the way they took care of their bodies from primary source texts, to give you all an idea of the sorts of sources that we have to inform our understanding of history. Yay, Ayla, welcome. Good to see you this morning. Haas, good morning. It is early-ish where you are, I assume. It is a beautiful rainy day here in Daegu, South Korea. The cherry blossoms have bloomed in force, and there is a gentle pitter-patter, the gentle susurration of falling water to accompany us on our medieval storytime journey. So just let me know how the sound is. If the gentle susurration of rain becomes ungentle, I can close the window.
Do we have to do some shirtless modern parts?
It's a shirtless modern, but
That wasn't a no.
That wasn't a no. So I'm just combing my hair, and my recent video on hair combing, of course, triggered a lot of very angry people, which is unsurprising, because the second you suggest that the common knowledge that has been pounded into people's brains through 100 years of advertising, 100 plus years of advertising, may be incorrect and deceitful, cognitive dissonance arises, and so people react very negatively, but that's okay. Good morning, good evening, Takeda. Lovely to see you again. It's been a while. I know the reenactment season is getting underway. The living history season is getting underway. The folk dance season is getting underway. And so many people are no longer home on the weekends. So I know that many of you can't necessarily join when I'm actually live, which is why I've been trying to increasingly do more things during the week as well. It's just a challenge finding a time slot where I don't have other things scheduled in the week. That is also a time when most of you, my core audience, are actually awake. Yeah, so last night we actually spent an hour-ish picking out the dust and dirt and detritus, because I know it triggers a lot of people when I pronounce that word the Latin way instead of the English pronunciation of a Latin word. But this is what the comb cleans out of the hair. And so many people commented, combs do not clean hair. The oil just traps dirt, and then the comb beats it into my hair somehow. And that is not true. The comb removes the oil, it redistributes the oil, and it also thereby pulls out that dirt that the natural oils in your hair and on your scalp may have captured. And you can literally see it. It's visible. You can see what it is that this thing takes from your hair. Brushes are the same way. Most people don't really look at the base of the bristles of their brush because they don't want to look at what is lurking there below. But brushes do the same thing. They also help remove the detritus from your hair, right? All of the buildup, the dead skin cells, the dirt and pollution from the air that builds up on our hair, because even though we don't have open fires in most places anymore, there's still pollution. So brushes do it too. It's just that most people don't actually look closely at their brushes. So yeah, it is remarkable. And also people didn't actually listen to what I was saying in that video. What I said in that video was not that you should never wash your hair again. All you need is a comb. I also didn't say that you had to dry comb your hair. I didn't say that. but a lot of people took it, you know, they took as much offense from it as they possibly could. And a whole plethora of commenters felt motivated to take precious time from their day and respond that, you know, going a new no poo way of life is something they couldn't possibly do. It wouldn't work for them. But the irony of them saying that is that they haven't tried it, because if they had tried it, then they would have said, it didn't work for me, I tried it. But the reality is that these shampoos, these modern shampoos that people are using in their hair are extremely surfactant. They completely strip the oils from people's scalps and from their hair, and especially the oils from the scalps. When you repeatedly, on a daily, and in some cases more than daily basis for some obsessive compulsive individuals, strip the oils from your scalp, the result is that the skin of your scalp, it is skin, responds by upping oil production, which means your hair gets greasier, right? Your scalp gets greasier. But if you actually stop stripping the oils from your scalp, it usually takes about 6 weeks to 2 months. Your skin will rebalance back out. For most people, it will rebalance back out. It will tone down the oil production and will return to a normal state of oil production. So, yeah. Rude people exist. Some people are looking for something to be offended about. Yeah, I mean, we do live in an era of hypersensitivity where people have been toxified basically by social media into being basically hyperallergenic to any comment and to interpret everything in the worst possible light. I had one particularly rude American, probably American, I'm guessing American by the comment, on my travel channel, where I posted a video about how Koreans don't believe in cultural appropriation. They don't care about it. It's not something they think about it, and how they actually like seeing foreigners wearing hanbok. And how Koreans don't need Westerners to rise to their defense and defend their culture, and make decisions about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of sharing their culture and the way in which Koreans share their culture. And of course, someone got as offended as possible, listened to my words in the most offendable way she possibly could, and read all sorts of meaning and nuance and subtext into what I was saying that is not in the words that I actually said. So yeah, that is the era in which we live, sadly. Yeah. Let me see. Shampoos and conditioners and products used to strip the scalp make money for the sellers. It's like the yards where the clippings are removed, and it is basically hydroculture. Yep. That is it. That is it. And it started in the end of the 19th century. And you can see all these advertisements for a massive range of body care products, and talking about how if you don't use this, you're a disgusting person. And so that's when the brainwashing started, right? That's when the brainwashing started. So it's, the implication that for literally hundreds of thousands of years, humans were just greasy, dirty primates is ridiculous, because even primates have ways, primates who aren't human, non-human primates, have ways to clean themselves that don't involve shampoo, right? Anyway, yeah. So I'm just combing my hair now in preparation to braid it. Actually, I should have put on my dress first, but I was thinking about the comb going into this. I meant to take a picture of what we cleaned out of my other medieval comb after just about a week and a half of using it, just to show you exactly how much grease and how much dirt and dust and ash and pollution these medieval combs really do. I'll just show it to you. This is a replica medieval comb, basically, right? So they really do a really good job of cleaning your scalp, because you actually drag it along your scalp like this, right? You drag it along your scalp, and that actually exfoliates your scalp. It redistributes those oils. But even medieval people, so there's a difference between the way humans lived before civilization and the way humans have lived post-civilization, and I fully acknowledge that. I fully acknowledge that, because basically once humans started living in cities, we started surrounding ourselves with open flames and fire. And fire is not just smoky air, it's dust, it's ash, there's grease that comes up from that fire too. And so that floats around and that gets in your hair, and that is not natural. That is not how, normally animals run away from fire. It's only humans who said, oh, we should go sit by the fire instead, right? So I fully acknowledge that we need solutions to remove the pollution that builds up in our hair, because combing is not necessarily going to get all of that really tough stuff that can float about in the air out of your hair. But medieval people acknowledge that. And they also had hair washes that are made of lye, that basically it's like a soap solution. And the advice was that you should wash your hair every 3 weeks. I created a big knot, got a little motivated in what I was saying, and I created a big snarl in my hair. Anyway, medieval people acknowledged that there would be a need for washing your hair, but it wasn't every day, it wasn't every other day, it was about once every 3 weeks. This is also because medieval people, women especially, in most places in medieval Europe, most places, women and men, but especially women, covered their hair. And it wasn't just a question of modesty, it was a question of practicality. One, fire, open flames are dangerous for long hair just floating around and whipping around you. You don't, Human Torch is bad. Two, if your hair is out and exposed, then when you're in a home where there is no chimney, because most homes in medieval Europe didn't have chimneys. Chimneys don't become commonplace until the 17th century in Europe, if you can believe that. So homes were smoky, the air was physically dirty. So people covered their hair because they knew that if they didn't, it would get dirtier faster, right? Which is why I'm pretty certain the advice was to wash your hair once every 3 weeks. Yeah, I'm not sure it gets pretty naughty. So Tomicor, I've got naturally curly hair, and the more humid it gets, see, there's 2 sets of tines, and that's what you have to understand. There's 2 sets of tines. There's a wide set and there's a narrow set. You start with the wide set, and there's wider and wider, right? But I mean, brushes are a recent invention, everyone. For thousands of years, people didn't have brushes. They had combs, and yet all kinds of hair types managed to be combed. Now, I would recommend Tomicor. In your daughter's case, I would probably recommend a finger combing first, right? You do a finger combing to get out the major knots and the major snarls, and then you go back through and use the comb. But I mean, the other difference is that, again, most young ladies, their hair wasn't just left down, it was braided. Even if they were young ladies, their hair was braided so that you'd comb it, you would braid it, it wouldn't get tangled. But a lot of people young girls leave their hair down now, and I mean girls leave their hair down now and they play and it gets snarled. So we are operating under a different set of circumstances. There is some evidence, though, across various cultures, including Asia, that they utilized a variety of oils to help to make combing easier, right? It wasn't about conditioning the hair necessarily, it was about making the combing easier or creating a certain effect or making the hair stay in place. In Korea, historically, for I think at least 1,500 years, I've documented it too, they used rice bran oil. And you put some on your comb, and then you would comb it through your hair, and it would make it all extra shiny. And then it would also allow them to do those styles without any frizz. In Europe, in the Mediterranean, it was olive oil. I haven't necessarily found evidence of those oils being used in Northern Europe, but presumably if the comb is getting tangled, you figure out some kind of lubricant to put on it that you can then comb through your hair. Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem is that most people don't know how to use a comb. So here's the other thing about using a comb. You don't start at the beginning of the process at the top and comb down. No. At the beginning of the process, you start at the very ends. You comb out section by section. And if my hair isn't very thick, sadly, but if you have thick hair, then you start section by section, right? You section off a section. You start at the ends. You work your way up piece by piece, right? You don't just You don't just start at the top of the scalp and go. Right? So there, it's just literally thousands of years, combs were it. There were no brushes. That's a very recent invention, the hairbrushes. So they made it work. You just use a different technique. My daughters are Asian too. Their mom is Cantonese. She uses coconut oil. Yeah, Canton, that's like basically almost a tropical part of Asia. They didn't have coconuts in Korea, so they used rice bran oil. And you have to figure out what works for your hair. There are different hair types. I also think that there's part of the problem is that most of us don't live where our current phenotypes evolved. So for instance, my hair is super happy right now because it's humid out, because there's rain, right? My people are from Ireland and Central Europe. Those are my ancestors for the most part. And their hair, those are environments where there is generally humidity for a large part of the year. It doesn't often get dry, very, very dry in those places. And so my skin and my hair respond best to, at the very least, medium humid to very humid conditions is when my hair and my skin looks the happiest, when I feel the happiest. But then I get in dry conditions like, say, New Mexico, and my skin and hair hate life. So I think that if we actually lived in the places for which our hair has evolved, basically, we might also find different outcomes, and we would have to fight the elements less. Yeah. Okay. Well, moving on, because I do want to get to our story time, even though so the thing I love about this comb, I love how it feels actually being dragged across my scalp. It really is like a kind of scalp massage. And it certainly increases the blood flow much more than a brush would, because it's a much more direct, higher pressure point on the scalp, right? So I really do actually enjoy the process quite a bit. Contessa, do you find brushes get nicer with use, like using them makes them even smoother? Brushes. No, brushes don't get nicer with use. Well, I mean, okay, it depends on the kind of bristles, right? So if you're talking about natural boar bristles, well, over time they actually get, they don't get smoother. They actually, because it's a kind of hair, so it actually gets fluffier. So it definitely doesn't get smoother with time. Plastic bristles are plastic and do what plastic does, not much, that is to say. But I haven't used a brush. I don't know. I don't remember the last time I used a hairbrush. I've been using a comb for 10 years at least at this point. Yeah, I haven't used a brush in a very long time. So my intelligence on brushes is very outdated, shall we say, and more misty in my memory. But I do remember that my boar's bristle brushes they frayed out with use because it's a kind of hair, basically. Oh, wooden combs. Oh, yeah, sorry, wooden combs. Yes, wooden combs. Yes, wooden combs definitely get smoother with use because the oils, some of the oils that the combs are redistributing are being absorbed into the wood, and it's basically combing your hair is like almost like a very, very fine kind of sanding, right? Is my theory anyway. So the oils are getting smoothed into the wood, the grain gets smoother and more compact the more you do it. Yes, I have absolutely observed that with use, comb tines get smoother on wooden combs. Absolutely, yep. Here in Brazil, we used to have bone combs. Yes, in medieval Europe, and up until the 19th century, when they invented celluloid, the first plastic, most Europeans and Americans and Canadians, Westerners, Europeans, yeah, we also had bone combs. But those were a luxury item. Bone and ivory combs were on the luxury end of the scale. The wooden combs were on the lower end of the scale and more socioeconomically accessible. But I will say that I'm in my experience, I think that the wooden combs are actually more effective at the cleaning process and especially at redistributing the oils because of the absorbent nature of the wood. Right. So I actually think it's better for your hair and your scalp especially your hair, to use the wooden combs over the ivory combs. Yet another of those little ironies in which it's possible that the lower members of society, the members of the lower socioeconomic end of the spectrum, may have actually had better outcomes than the members of the wealthier side of the spectrum. I was just responding to someone's question earlier about this. So the wooden combs, I'm pretty certain, are better at cleaning the hair and conditioning the hair with its own oils. I mean, look at how nice and shiny that is, right? I haven't used conditioner in years, I should point out. And so wooden combs are better. Lower members on the lower socioeconomic end of the socioeconomic end of the spectrum can afford wooden combs. But this is not the same. I say the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and modern people automatically interpret that as poor. And I don't mean poor. There's a large, thriving middle class in the Middle Ages, and it gets bigger as the Middle Ages go on, actually. But, wood is something that anyone could afford, basically. And same thing with food. With food, the wealthy people, the affluent people, whether they're aristocrats or well-heeled merchants or peasants who've made it, so to say, they're eating a lot of meat. They are eating so much meat, and they're eating bread made from refined wheat flour. So their bread has no bran in it. It has no nutritional value to speak of, because flour without the bran, medieval flour was not enriched the way modern flour is in the US, right? So it doesn't really have much left in the way of vitamins. It's just basically macronutrients. And it's a lot of refined carbohydrates. So the wealthy were eating this basically nutritionless, pure caloric, basically turns easily to sugar in your mouth white bread, while the people who had less money couldn't afford wheat bread, and they definitely couldn't afford white wheat bread. So they were eating bread made of whole grain rye, whole grain, and so spelt was a kind of wheat that was also kind of expensive, but rye was on the lower end of the cost spectrum. So the poorer people who weren't rich, were eating bread that was sourdough. It was made of rye, so the gluten in it isn't nearly as deleterious anyway. It's way more nutrient dense. And so they're getting more nutrients from their food. They're also not eating nothing but meat. They're eating a lot of root vegetables. They're eating a lot of green herbs. They're eating a lot of wild green things that just grow around, right? So their diets are actually more complex, more well-balanced, and way more nutritious. So yeah, it is one of those weird ironies that peasants in quotes, because that term we're trying to move away from that term in historical circles. Peasants actually ate a better diet than the wealthy did, as long as there wasn't a famine. Obviously, the second there's a famine, it all goes out the window, and then the rich at least get food, right? But as long as it's not a time of famine, as long as times are normal, yeah, it wasn't the poor people who were suffering from gout and developing diabetes and whatnot. Yeah, everyone, if you're enjoying the prelude to this medieval story time, don't forget to double tap that screen and consider subscribing. But, in general, the kind of poverty and starvation and squalor and filth and stench and lack of sanitation that people associate with the Middle Ages isn't medieval at all, but Victorian or 18th century. It's a product of the Industrial Revolution. And I know all of you out there who are my regular followers, you've heard this before. You've heard me say it frequently. I feel like I just need to say it again for those who are joining the community very recently, that the medieval world gets accused of a lot of ills that aren't actually part of the medieval world. And I recently found this fascinating essay by a historian. It was a Speculum essay. Speculum is a magazine, a journal of medieval history that was founded a little over 100 years ago. And this this historian was writing this essay about why it is that so many people think the Middle Ages was this benighted, filthy time, because he was trying to counter the narrative of his fellow historians from his era that spread lies and rumors and misconceptions about the Middle Ages. And as he points out, he says most people seem to assume that human progress is a linear function, which means that in the 19th century, a lot of cities were disgusting. I mean, filthy. Water was undrinkable, cholera was rampant, poverty everywhere, people living in the streets, lots of orphan children running about, starving, wearing rags, lots of beggars, really a benighted time. The 19th century sucked badly, way worse than many of the centuries that had preceded it. And so the cities, people were observing, well, these cities are really disgusting. He observes this. He says, in general, his theory was that people look around them and saw how awful things were, and they assumed that human progress being a linear function, that must mean that the cities in the Middle Ages were even worse. And that's just not true. He actually started looking at the evidence, and he found out that certain cities, like certain Italian cities in the Middle Ages, Venice was reputed by foreign travelers in the Middle Ages as being such a clean city that you could lick the streets. Direct quote from a traveler who visited in the 14th century. Venice has gotten a lot better, but I still wouldn't lick the streets of Venice now. There was another city he looked at where in the Middle Ages they paid a whole host of street cleaners to go and clean the streets every day of any filth that had accumulated over the last 24 hours, first thing in the morning. And that city in his era had stopped that entirely, right? So progress is not a linear function. Just because something was bad in the 19th century, a city was disgusting in the 19th century, doesn't mean it was in the Middle Ages. Yeah, Venice can smell a little bad, but the smell in Venice is not people. Most of the smell that I've smelt in Venice is the water. It's the lagoon, and the water levels are dropping, and that's a problem. Rosemary, welcome. Lovely to see you. Yeah. Yeah. So we just have to remember that is just not the case. I had someone else comment something interesting about the hand washing, the surgeons and hand washing debate that I unleashed. And he observed that he said that the problem in the 19th century, the 18th and 19th century, was not that surgeons weren't washing their hands. It's that what they started doing, which was examining corpses, doing autopsies, and then going straight to surgery, but washing their hands in the old way, which is to say just soap and maybe soap water and maybe some vinegar, wasn't enough of a disinfectant effect to counter having had their hands inside of a rotting corpse, basically. So the bacteria that were that start really mass producing when a human dies, when their immune system stops functioning, was survive the hand washing process. And so that was the problem, is that you had doctors suddenly going directly from the morgue to the operating theater. And that is what resulted in the sudden uptick in deaths. And, when Lister comes along, and then there was this German gentleman, I forget what his name was, he suggests that you should start washing your hands in chlorine. And this was before germ theory, because it worked. He knew it worked. He knew it prevented, infection from spreading when you did surgery, but he didn't understand why at the time. So it's not necessarily a question of that surgeons between the Middle Ages and the 18th and 19th century stopped washing their hands. It's that they started doing other things before surgery that basically couldn't be countered by the standard hand washing practices of the time. Now, I haven't been able to follow that line of logic down to see if that's really true. And 18th and 19th century medical practices is not my field of expertise at all, nor do I care for it to become. But I do know, for instance, that President Garfield of the United States of America, his doctors didn't wash their hands at all before sticking their fingers in his gunshot wound when he was shot twice towards the end of the 19th century. And they kept sticking their dirty, unwashed fingers in his wound for days afterwards. The poor man, right? For days and weeks in some cases. And I know that the history that I have read talking about it claims they did not wash their hands. So it might be a combination of factors. It might be that some surgeons definitely washed their hands, but they just weren't washing them in a way that was effective to counter the kinds of microbes that they were encountering in their daily work, and that others just weren't washing their hands. And then the question comes, well, why did they stop when since ancient Rome, it was standard practice to wash your hands before and after a procedure? Well, that could come from the arrogance of progress, which is to say that doctors assuming that something that was done before must be old-fashioned and ineffective, and that we're going to do it differently because we're better, because we are the next generation, right? That is part of it. I also had this idea that maybe because in the Middle Ages in Europe, all of the great medical schools were in Catholic, what would become Catholic places once the Reformation set in, and that a lot of these issues with dirty hands are actually happening in places like England and Northern Europe, and also in America, where there is definitely an anti-popish sentiment, an anti-Catholic sentiment. And so it could be that, certain schools started denigrating and or discarding any sort of standardized techniques that were being taught in those medical schools. I don't know. There was a physician in the early 19th century I read he actually commented that a lot of the medical practices from the Middle Ages ran counter to liberty. And so it could be that these physicians started viewing enforced hand washing as some kind of repression of their natural expression as a surgeon. I don't know. This guy was actually talking specifically about quarantine. He decided that quarantine was a practice we should no longer follow because it violated people's liberty to just go about as they please. And so that's another reason that the cholera outbreaks got so bad, other than the source, but why the spread of disease in the 19th century got so bad is they stopped quarantining people. They decided that this thing that had worked for hundreds of years to counter the spread of plague just wasn't really a good practice, apparently. Yeah, faith alone medicine. You braid fast. Oh, thank you. I do braid fast. Let me see. I'd imagine washing hands could be seen as time wasting too. I mean, some were timing themselves to amputate limbs quick. Yeah, Villa Vendetta. That's a good point. Those horrific. Those horrific. There were also contests, right? Who could amputate faster? Now, granted, as a patient, I would want a fast amputation, especially in the 19th century. But on the other hand, actually doing a competition, that's kind of grotesque. Yeah, progress isn't always Semmelweis. Thank you, Artemis. That was it. Semmelweis, right? Semmelweis. That was him. Yep. Artemis Schröder. Yep. Wait, Cattler? Is there a cat here? I didn't see a cat. Wasn't there a famous cholera map of wells in London? Yes, beneficent. There absolutely was. And basically, eventually, it was in the 19th century that they finally put two and two together about the spread of cholera. Yeah. Let me see. Wasn't there a guy who had a 300% death rate during one surgery? He was whipping the knife around so fast he nicked two bystanders and they both died from infections as well as the person that was operated on. Yeah, I remember reading about that. I don't remember what his name was, but yeah, that is true. I remember. I think Extra History actually made a short about that, which is pretty funny. Who was it? Robert Liston. Yeah, Robert Liston apparently had a 300% death rate in the 19th century in one operation. He killed his patient and two bystanders. Oh, good times. But it was the Middle Ages that was so benighted, right? Were earrings a common thing in the Middle Ages? Middle Ages is 1,000 years of history. So there are periods when earrings were common and popular and worn by men and women. And there are times and places where that was not true. By There seems to be a drop-off in Western Europe of people wearing earrings starting in the 12th century. It seems that we have evidence up until the 10th, early 11th century. We have archaeological evidence and pictorial evidence and graves where earrings are found, right? But then, because in ancient Rome, they were very popular, ancient Greece, popular, right? But they fall out of fashion, and I don't know why. I haven't looked into this because I hate earrings on me. I can't stand have anything appended to my ear, so I haven't done tons of research into this in the pre-medieval era. But you know, by the 13th century in Western Europe, they seem to have fallen out of favor and out of fashion. And it's not until the 16th century that you start to see earrings again in Western Europe as a fashion choice. Men and women, by the way. Why is there squeaking? There is no squeaking? I don't know. What's, I'm not certain. Does anyone else hear a squeaking? I think this is my favorite dress of yours. The color is just lovely. Oh, thank you. Green is a good color on me, I will admit. Unfortunately, because I bargain hunt for my fabric, I don't always get the best choice in colors because I also just don't want to pay full price for fabric. So I'm always looking for a good bargain, which means sometimes I'm going to accept colors that aren't bad, but they're just not necessarily the best. Best colors for me are like green, purple, and certain shades of blue. Darker blues are good colors for me. Yeah. Let me see. Husafel, happy Friday and happy Good Friday to those of you who celebrate if it is still Friday for you. Yep. Just getting some tea out. Okay, so I was actually going to put on another layer for you all today, but I'm also going to put my hair up in my quick and dirty, what I call the quick and dirty bun. I just tie my braids again and again and again because, oh, Handsome, could you bring me one of my kerchiefs, please? I forgot my kerchief. It should be on the drying rack. Yeah. Did they have pillows in the 13th century? Yes. Humans have been using pillows, as far as I can tell, for thousands of years, at least in Asia, Africa, and Europe. I don't know about the Americas. I haven't done a study on interior living in the pre-Columbian era in the Americas.
Largest?
Yeah, my largest. I'm not wearing headphones today. Okay, some of you wanted to see the pattern, the shaping of this, my kerchief, right? So it's basically, it's a rectangle and it's a trapezoid sewn together. And it just goes on over my head like this. It's called a cuffia in Italian, or a kerchief in English, a couvre-chef in French. And then I take the ends of the trapezoid, pull it against my head, and twist, counter twist. I twist inward with the ends. So that creates a little pocket in the back, kind of cupping the hair on the back of my head. And then there's a couple of ways. I prefer to actually bring it up like this because I like the shaping that results from bringing it up on the side, but you can also actually cross it behind and then bring it up as well if you want a tighter fit. I prefer this look. This look I think is better for me anyway. Let me see. So yes, they had pillows in the 13th century in Europe, 100%. They didn't necessarily look like the pillows you would know. They had bolster-shaped pillows, round-shaped pillows, like one giant pillow that kind of goes across the whole bed, the whole bed. Yeah, so definitely they had pillows. Pillows were could be stuffed with a variety of materials, so everyone could have a pillow, right? Even people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum could afford a pillow. So we have pillows could be stuffed with straw. They could be stuffed with fabric scraps. We have inventories from the Medici that actually talk about straw mattresses and pillows being stuffed with straw and fabric scraps, linen scraps, wool scraps, being stuffed with down, being stuffed with linen flax, right? Flax, like unspun flax. We have unspun wool, like just the wool scraps, but also wool, like fleece wools, basically wool roving. That's what I'm looking for. Wool roving. We have evidence of, feathers of various kinds, from down to the very fine eider down to less fine feathers. you know, there are a variety of materials that they use to stuff pillows. So pillows were not just something that only the wealthy could afford, just that probably only the wealthy could afford down feathers for their pillows. Oh, thank you, Husafel. Appreciate it. Okay, so now just a little bit of bling, and now I'm going to put on another layer for you all. But I have to purloin the lace from another of my gowns because this other layer laces over top of this one. We're in a bit of disarray here in the Contessa's household. I don't have damsels to actually keep track of all of my things, and I'm pretty busy in the creative process of things. So organizing objects is not my strong suit. So I have to actually go and kind of locate all of my various laces that I've made that actually have points on them because they've all wandered off somewhere, or the cats have made off with them or something like that. A pillow with wool inside of it doesn't actually sound that bad. Wool stuffed pillows are super nice. I have a wool mattress topper, super nice. Wool makes an excellent, excellent stuffing. It really does. Especially because, you know, it's the wool that's being stuffed into those layers has been cleaned. So it doesn't smell like stinky wet sheep. It doesn't smell like, it's not prickly. It doesn't prickle you, but it is fluffy and it breathes really well. And it is very antimicrobial. So having a mattress or a pillow stuffed with wool is actually a really good choice for a lot of reasons. Didn't the Medici have a painting of the Last Judgment in their accounting room? In the accounting room, I haven't read that. Well, rather, I haven't. When I was reading through the inventory, I don't remember where where there might have been a painting of the Last Judgment, but that sounds like something the Medici would have done. I mean, they were pretty self-aware, shall we say. Darn it, this actually knotted on, it came out. Handsome, you're going to have to reattach this point, unfortunately. I might not be able to put on the layer. I don't have an extra lace. Okay, I won't be putting on the layer. I made a bum roll stuffed with fabric scraps. It's heavy. Yeah, fabric scraps don't make fluffy, they make dense. But it's a good use for all those little offcuts that you can't turn into anything else. Linen offcuts can be turned into paper. By the 15th century, there are paper factories, you know, pretty ubiquitous by that point. But wool can't be really turned into paper as far as I know, or they didn't turn it into paper in any case. So wool offcuts were you know, generally used for stuffing, sometimes you know, stuffing a variety of things, including these mattresses and pillows, for instance. Yeah. Okay, so we are ready for medieval story time, but I'll show you the garment I was going to put over top. It's got, I mean, it tore out and there's knots on both ends, so I guess I can just cut the knot off. I didn't think about that.
Let me see. Let me see.
I mean, the thing. What are you doing? Did the kitties do something, or did something just randomly fall off of the wall?
No, the scented oil stuff fell off the back of the toilet again.
On its own.
Yep.
That's interesting. I think this apartment is haunted. Oh, Rosemary, you made it so it's too big, so it falls off. That is a problem. I will say I probably, for a bum roll, I would have used something lighter, okay, like maybe wool roving. Here, just lace it through. I would have maybe done wool roving instead. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put on a toppa today. Oh, this one has a, oh, but it doesn't have a.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put on another layer today. I'm going to put on a toppa. And this is a salt. It's gracious, I don't want to drama much. This goes over top. And by putting this layer on, I could actually reasonably go out of doors and not embarrass my family by being seen out of doors. This one is open in the front and it laces, not shut, it laces into an open V so that you can see the you'll see it frames the bodice of the kota underneath of it. So it is not supposed to lace shut. And there is some debate as to whether the choppa, whether open choppa that are open in the front were actually a thing. It's kind of hard to tell from the depictions of them whether all of them are closed or some of them are open, because the frescoes that depict them aren't necessarily focusing so hard on depicting that opening clearly or depicting it as a closure clearly. So I have both kinds. I have a choppa that is closed in the front, and I have a choppa that is open in the front. I will say, from the pragmatic perspective of movement, having it open in the front makes it a lot easier. So yeah, it's a point of debate. Some people believe different things, and the documentary evidence isn't really clear. I haven't seen any clear documentary evidence pointing to it being open or closed. I sacrificed a teddy for your... Ayla, do you mean you sacrificed a teddy bear to make a bum roll? Is that what you mean? That is an interesting... That's an interesting bit of reusing. Oh, zip ties also work great for boning and stays. I know lots of people who have used zip ties for boning and stays. But in fairness, in this era, there are no stays in the 15th century. And they don't really come about until the very end of the 16th century is when you actually start getting boned stays. The middle of the 16th century. In Italy, they don't wear them though. In Italy, they have soft padding. They have soft laminated padding in their garments in the 16th century. We have a bunch of extant dresses that have survived, and women who were buried in their funeral garments, and they're not buried in stays. Their dresses actually are like the bodice of their gowns is like 5 layers that's been pad stitched together. So there are different ways to create stiffness than just boning. Okay, so this is with the choppa on, right? And I want this looks kind of white in this camera, but it's a pink silk damask. So this is me dressed. Now, honestly, if I were going to go out as an aristocratic woman, I shouldn't be wearing this, like what I call my house kufiya, my house kerchief. I should actually have my hair done up nicely and then actually have a proper veil on it. So I'm still kind of semi-casual, shall we say, for a Florentine woman of the 1470s to 1490s. Yeah, no, I am all about reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm about living history within your budget, right? There are unfortunately some real snobs out there who have no empathy and no understanding of other people's situations, who believe, and seriously believe, that if you don't have a perfectly authentic kit, and authenticity is a spectrum, I can prove that to you in a very quickly. If you don't have a perfectly authentic kit, you shouldn't even be at an event unless at all. You can come in modern clothes and observe if it's a public event, but otherwise you shouldn't be allowed to participate until you've achieved their idea of perfectly authentic. Of course, what is authentic? What is authentic, right? Is authentic the 10-foot rule? Is authentic having everything be hand woven and naturally dyed using medieval methods and techniques? Is it being dyed using plants that are grown from seeds that have somehow survived from the Middle Ages, so that you get exactly the same kind of dye stuff that they would have had versus the cultivars of those plants that have probably evolved and changed since then? Is it having your fabric made from the wool of an heirloom variety of sheep, breed of sheep, that is the same kind of sheep that existed in the Middle Ages, right? Like what is truly authentic? So authenticity is a spectrum. There is no perfect authenticity, short of time traveling back and stealing someone's clothes and bringing them forward. So I completely support organizations in deciding what is authentic for their organization and what is authentic for their event. But they don't get to gatekeep for other people or other people's organizations, and they don't get to tell people who aren't part of their group what is good enough or not good enough, right? That's not, And we should be supporting each other. We should be encouraging, right? You know, why be negative about it? But there's some people who only understand criticism and negativity and who must be generally miserable human beings on the inside. Question or comment. As a woman in medieval times, you definitely need to be handy with a needle, not just women. So that's a modern misconception about the Middle Ages, that sewing and weaving is women's work, but it is not. In the ancient world, in many parts of the ancient world, ancient Mediterranean world, that was true. That is not true in medieval Europe. Most of the weavers are men. Most of the tailors are men. Many seamers, the people actually doing the sewing, are men. Women tended to be the spinners, but there were some male spinners. So a spinster is a woman who spins professionally originally, and a spinner was a man who spun professionally, right? It tended to be women, but we do have some evidence of men doing it as well. So actually in the Middle Ages, men were just as likely to be handy with a needle as women were. And men were also the professional embroiderers. Men also tended to be the professional tapestry makers. So that kind of the idea of the separation of men's work and women's work in terms of if it's a hand, if it involves fabric and sewing, it's women. If it involves metal and stone, if it involves hard, manly materials, then it's men. That doesn't hold up. That doesn't pass the truth test of the medieval world. And the question of how much a noble woman would have, what her needle skills would have been like, say, in the 15th century. Many noble women could do embroidery. Many upper class women could do embroidery, but that is not the same as necessarily being able to sew a seam, right? Or engage in tailoring. By the 15th century, tailoring is a professional field. Noble women have no role in making their own clothing, with the exception of certain places where the lady of the house traditionally makes the undergarments for the household, for the close members of their family, right? There is some evidence of that in the 14th and 15th century in various parts of Italy, for instance, that the lady of the house was directly involved in the production of undershirts, maybe to the point of actually sewing them, but definitely at least directly overseeing the production process. But no, it's in the medieval world, not just women who know how to handle a needle. Everyone knows how to handle a needle if they're involved in, if that is their skill. And lots of men were involved in the clothing production industry. Yeah. Let me see. Does that mean that fiber arts were more respected in that time due to men's involvement? Respected? What does respected mean? I don't think so. I think it's a pre-industrial era, right? So the question is, was the fact that men were involved in textile production and clothing production mean that it was a more respected field? I don't think so. It was a question of economics. Whatever earned the most money was respected generally. So, wool weavers, wool was the fabric of choice in the Middle Ages everywhere. And it was essential from the pragmatic, practical level up to the finest satiny, silky doeskins. And so wool weavers tended to be respected as people if they were wealthy and they managed their business well. Were they respected because they were wool weavers? A little bit more. I mean, there was, depending on where you were. In Italy, there's definitely a hierarchy of what kind of artisan is more respected than others. In London, the guilds actually vied for dominance in a hierarchy of guilds, of which guild was more important. But, does that come down to the actual skill itself, or is it a question of economics? So, yeah. I don't think it had anything to do with men's involvement or non-involvement. It was an economic question. And the reason men had to be involved, why you couldn't actually separate these things out, is because this is before the Industrial Revolution mechanizes all of these processes so heavily. This is before the spinning jenny. This is before automated weaving machines. Weaving machines, that doesn't sound right. Looms. Sorry, I was translating from another language in my head. Looms. Mechanized looms driven by steam power, right? So because of that, you needed more humans to actually participate in the production process, because there weren't the kinds of machines hadn't been invented, automated machines hadn't yet been invented to do that. So I think it's more a question of you needed full participation in order to produce enough clothing for everyone, is what it came down to. Yeah. In our modern Middle Ages, his spouse has made his own garb before we met. Yep. Ursula Bear. Yep. Let me see. Nevis says, while dismissiveness towards women's labor goes back further, it became much more extreme on average in the early modern period. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the further back you go, the less dismissive women's contributions to the economy becomes. And there's a variety of factors that play into that. And this, we're talking Europe. So please remember that this does not apply to Asia. This does not apply to Korea, to Japan, to China, to Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, any of those places, Mongolia. This does not apply to any of those places. I'm not talking about those places. I'm talking about Western Europe mostly, because Eastern Europe, also being closer to Asia, tends to have some different things going on. Catherine of Aragon supposedly made Henry shirts, or some of them. Yes, I have heard that. I've read that. I have never seen the primary source that proves that, but I have read that in biographies. I read that in Catherine of Aragon's, several of her biographies. But I've always been interested what the original source for that was. Yeah, as Nevis says, I think it was more like high-class women were rich enough to have someone else do the fiber arts for them. Yeah, which is why in the ancient world, spinning and weaving was generally women's work, because the men were actually there was a bigger warrior class in a lot of those, in a lot of parts of the world, in the ancient world, right? So women were kind of at home, also protecting the homestead in certain ways, weaving and spinning, even the noble women. But again, it's a question of, we need all hands on deck. There isn't enough of a population to support some women doing nothing all day. Even in ancient Rome, aristocratic women wove and spun fabric as part of their daily activities. And that continued. That might be also why there's an impression that it was women's work. And that continued into the first millennium in a lot of places in Europe, but somewhere along the way, and I don't know when the transition actually happened. I don't know when men started participating in the textile production as well. I haven't tracked that transition, but I know that by the 13th century, men are doing a lot of the weaving and a lot of participating very heavily in the textile production and embroidering and tapestries and all of that. Rosemary says this has been seen in other cultures too. As soon as trade started to make money, and usually done by women, the men took over the profession. I mean, that does happen in the Middle Ages for certain, with ale making, with ale and beer making, right? Ale and beer making in Europe started off in the Middle Ages as something that the women did on the side as, part of their other household activities. And they would actually, that's where the term alewife comes from, right? And then they would actually set up basically like an ale pop-up store outside of their home. They would hang a sign or put up a broom, I think. And that would tell people that ale was available, because ale didn't have a long shelf life. This is before hops was added as a preservative. So ale did not have a long shelf life. So it needed to be consumed relatively quickly. And so she would put up a broom indicating that there was ale available for sale, and people would come and usually drink it right there in her home. And then eventually men did take it over because they realized there was profit in it. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That does also happen, 100%. Yeah, Nevis says, not certain. Yeah, so nothing is a linear trajectory in human history or development. Nothing, almost nothing. Very little has a linear trajectory in human development. So just because in ancient Rome women were very heavily involved in textile production doesn't mean that's going to be the case in the Middle Ages, nor that it will be the case in the modern era, or the earlier modern era, the mid-modern era, or the current modern era, right? Right now, we've seen a massive resurgence in the United States and Europe of men taking up the needle, engaging increasingly in fiber arts themselves, right? As in part because of the massive reenactment communities that are now everywhere to be found, but also because men are realizing that creativity in something that doesn't damage your body, like metal or wood, is fun also. You don't have to be a man. You don't have to risk life and limb just to prove that you're a manly man if you want to get creative. Yeah. Okay. The walking process of wool making in Scotland produced walking songs. Chalets the woman sung while processing wool. Yeah, but those walking songs all seem to be post-medieval. I have not seen a single evidence of a walking song that has survived from the Middle Ages. They all seem to be post-medieval. So again, it's not necessarily a straight line. And walking, for those who don't know, walking is a process by which you basically full wool, and you also remove the urine from it, or the lanolin from it using fermented urine. But walking mills were invented in the Middle Ages. So foot done walking, because it's not handmade, you're using your feet. The foot done walking that they used to do was more for homespun, for locally made, wools in more remote regions of Scotland, rather than the more centralized areas that had access to professionally produced fabrics. Yeah. But that was, home, and that is a distinction, that homespun fabrics, even in the Middle Ages, did tend to be made by the women of the family, but the professionally woven fabrics tended to be made by the men. And that kind of lines up with the difference between home cooking in the Middle Ages and professional cooking. So in the great households, the professional, the heads of the kitchen, the head chefs, were men. I've never seen an example of a woman. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. I just haven't personally seen an example of a woman who is the head of a kitchen of a great household. If you have evidence of a woman who is the head cook in a royal household or a noble household or a rich aristocratic household, let me know. I'd be interested to hear that. I've only seen evidence of men being the head cooks. So always looking for different evidence, of course. Whereas it seems that home cooks were women, right? And you can see that in the depictions of works like Taquinum Sanitatis that show a man sitting there by the fire doing jack all, while a woman is usually hunched down over a hearth, because that's the way cooking happened back then, doing the cooking, right? But that's a home cooking experience, not the professional cooking. So there's definitely does seem to be a divide between the professional level and the homemade level of these skills. In the medieval world, Ayla, not in the Victorian era. The Victorian era, things definitely start changing. I'm talking about the medieval world specifically. So pre-1500, interested in evidence of pre-1500 women being head cooks, being the kitchen steward, the manager of the kitchen of the great house. Yeah. Let me see. I need to figure out how fulling was done here in New Mexico. That's a good question, Rosemary. Well, they didn't have sheep, so they had llama. What kind of fur did they? Sheep were introduced. Sheep were introduced, as far as I know. That was part of the Columbian Exchange. So they had llamas in South America. I'm not certain what they had. Before the Columbian Exchange. In the goats, maybe? I don't know if goats were part of the Columbian Exchange too, actually. Let me see. Yeah, I need my foot treadle machine back. When the grid goes down, I have a foot-powered sewing machine. I have 2 foot-powered sewing machines, and I prefer them massively over electric machines. 1, I have way more granular control over the speed of a foot-powered machine. 2, I get a little bit of exercise while I'm sewing. Gotta love that. And 3, those metal parts, they never break. There's no plastic degrade. There's no computer to lie to me that there is something wrong and to purposely lock the motor so that it won't keep sewing, which is my current problem, right? I love antique foot treadle sewing machines. They're the best. They're the best. You can't convince me otherwise. I don't need all of these bullshit fancy stitches. All I need is a straight stitch. That's all I need. I just need a straight stitch and the back stitch so that I can back up over my line so that I can lock the stitches in place. I don't need all that other bullshit. But that's just me. I know I'm always on some side of the bell curve, whether it's the better side or the less good side of the bell curve. I'm never in the bell curve when it comes to any aspect of life. That's just me. Wait, goats and sheep to the Americas? Yeah, I'm pretty certain that goats and sheep were both part of the Columbian Exchange. So they had llamas as a fiber producing animal. I'm not certain about. I don't know about the Americas or about North America. I'm not certain what animals they may have pursued specifically for their fur, their hair, in order to weave it and spin it. So I think that's probably post-Columbian Exchange, the wool being introduced, the wool making being introduced into societies, First People societies in the Americas. They had plenty. They had skins. They had hides. Lots of hides, obviously. Maybe llama fur, probably, but I don't think that would have gotten up into the northern parts. But I've not studied in-depth pre-Columbian Exchange material culture in the Americas. So yeah, not my strong suit. Okay, so I got comment. Ivan, my nan's old singer, that baby sews like a dream. Right through the fingers, baby. Yeah, I've sewn 2 very large hub and spoke pavilions on my foot treadled sewing machine. One of them, you'll see it again this coming Penzic, if you look at the footage of me setting a pavilion this past Penzic, if you go to my YouTube channel in the live stream recordings, I did a whole demonstration of how to set up a hub and spoke pavilion by just doing it live. And you can actually see that pavilion that I sewed myself 21 years ago. How crazy is that? 21 years ago. Yeah. And the fabric has almost given up the ghost, but I think it has a couple more events in it maybe. But yeah, the Shuriken, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Foot power sewing machines are the best. What kind of tea am I drinking tonight? I am drinking a jasmine tea with plum blossoms that I pulled off of the plum trees here before they went away and dried. So I'm drinking a lavender tea enhanced with locally grown plum blossom, or excuse me, not lavender. Jasmine tea with plum blossoms in it. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking today. Dogs bred for wool. Interesting. Dogs bred for wool. That is a very interesting. That's fascinating to breed. So some of you may know, and some of you may not, that we spend a lot of our time in Korea these days, and that over the last 12 years, I've probably spent 9 of them here. And one of the kinds of meat that you have been able to get here, but now no longer can, is dog meat. But the meat for dogs it wasn't this bullshit, xenophobic, racist crap of picking up animals that are just wandering down the street. No, there was a special breed of dog that was bred specifically for meat purposes. That was outlawed a couple of years ago. They outlawed dog meat restaurants and the consumption and sale of dog meat. And so that's gone away, but it had already basically been going away. It was only the older people who really still ate it. Younger people wanted nothing to do with it. But yeah, so that's equivalent, that I can see that they would have a special breed of dog that was bred for fur. Like here in Korea, they had a special breed of dog that was bred for meat. Yeah, jasmine with self-picked plum blossom. It is quite delicious. And now it's cherry blossom season, so I've been collecting cherry blossoms to have lavender tea with self-plucked cherry blossoms. Yeah. Oh, good night, Tomicor. Good night. Cotton is an old world plant, Rosemary, so I can't imagine that being there before the Columbian Exchange. Yeah, cotton was introduced to the Americas by the Europeans because that's a South Asian thing. I haven't seen evidence of it being here before the Columbian Exchange. Yeah. Unless that's in response to something else. No, I would never eat dog meat. Never, 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 never. No, okay, that's not true. If it were a famine, if it were an apocalypse situation and I were literally starving, then I would do that. But I've never eaten dog meat. I don't want to eat dog meat. No, thank you. Yeah. There was also cotton in the Americas. Interesting, because it was in it was, it's been in South Asia for thousands of years. So interesting. I wonder if that's just something that was around before the continent split up, or if the peoples when they migrated from Asia 18,000 plus years ago, if they just brought it with them. Interesting. I know the dogs bred for wool was a thing in the northwestern coast area. Very interesting. I wonder if any of those breeds of dogs still survive. That would be interesting to see. Suddenly I'm thinking to myself, oh, there's a use for all of those woolly dogs. Okay. He said only the absolute end of need. Yep, that's me. Yeah, I mean, it could be that seeds were carried across the ocean. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, so everyone, are we ready to get down to medieval story time? The actual purpose. Excuse me. I realize I'm not Mike. The actual purpose of today's reading. Oh, no. Rosemary, I believe that knowledge for the sake of knowledge is valuable. I do not believe that we need to monetize or commodify knowledge for it to be value in and of itself. So I appreciate you sharing the knowledge from your useful degree. Yeah. I wish we lived in a society that still valued knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but we're in a dark age, so that's not the world that we currently inhabit. Yeah. No, not a veer at all. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge, because as I said, I am not familiar with the material culture of pre-Columbian Exchange Americas. It's not my expertise. I know some things, but not a lot. So yeah. Okay, so the readings I've picked out. The first reading, and we'll see how far we get along in our medieval story time before, if we get to some of the other readings I've chosen. I have decided to return to the humor, because we live in a crashing mess of a world right now. I decided to return to some humor as provided by Giovanni Boccaccio in his classic collection of body stories, Il Decameron. Now, if you have seen the Decameron on Netflix, it is a terrible show. It is bullshit. It spreads more rumors and ridiculous misinformation about medieval life and also about medieval fashion. Don't watch it unless you want to just laugh at the nonsense. The clothing is terrible. It's not even at all the story that is told in this book. And it's not at all, it doesn't represent anything about this book. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible cancer on the entertainment industry. So the real Decameron, the Decameron, was written by Giovanni Boccaccio shortly at around the time of the Black Death. So in the 1350s, and he wrote it in the vernacular. So he wrote it in Tuscan Italian, which is basically what would become standard modern Italian, more or less. And he is writing about a group of, basically he presents a frame. So this is a story within stories within a story. The frame is that group of 10 aristocrats from Florence flee the city to a country estate country estate in what is Fiesole, which is now no longer the country. But Fiesole is still where a lot of really rich people live, including designers like Fendi. Actually, the Fendi family lives there. And these nobles basically spend 10 days trying to not die of plague and disporting and amusing themselves. And they have this whole monarchical system whereby on each day, a new person is chosen as monarch for the day. And the monarch for the day determines the themes of the stories that should be told in their storytelling, also what other kinds of activities in which they can engage. So if you're looking for a fun frame for a medieval living history or reenactment event, the Decameron gives you a really fun frame. Making someone the monarch for the day is just fun, right? And it doesn't have any of the weight of being an actual monarch, because you just get to be lighthearted and amusing and whimsical and capricious, but in a positive way. So that is the frame of the Decameron. They do not engage in acts of lasciviousness. They are not drunk for 10 days. Quite the opposite. They dance, they sing, they have picnics, they go for walks, they tell stories. So, and that's why when I saw just tiny little segments from Netflix's Decameron, I threw up in my mouth. It was terrible. So, yeah, good comment. Michia makes says, I could not force myself to finish that show, and I can usually trick myself into hate watching to finish a show. Not a chance with Netflix's Decameron. Thank you for helping me realize I'm not a failure. No, Michia makes, you are not a failure. Time is a precious resource. It is a finite resource. It is non-renewable. You cannot get time back. You should not waste a second more of your life on that monstrosity. SG, thank you. Nice outfit. I am dressed in 1480s Florentine style for today's story time as we read a story written by a famous son of Florence, Giovanni Boccaccio. Were the nobles left over from the Roman times? Ceramics action, that's a good question, and it's sort of, but not, it wasn't necessarily the same families, right? No. So is it just a continuation of the aristocratic families who were nobles in the Roman Empire? There were some of those, but there were also a lot of warlords in the interim who established themselves through deeds of arms as being powerful, or as a consequence of mercantile activity. Yeah, so it's not just a question of these were the same families who were aristocrats during the Roman Empire. Yeah, it's a combination. Yeah, Mitra makes, it's lovely to see you again. It's been a while. And nice to know the algorithm actually suggested you. Let's do it. This is the worst timeline. Yep. Okay, I need to take my earphones off. Totally understand. Yeah. Okay, so this story, therefore, takes place over 10 days. And they don't really make it past, they survive, but not to the 11th day. And so on each day, there are 10 stories. So 10 times 10 means that there's 100 stories. Many of these stories, it's very clear, and as often is the case with most novels, the stories themselves are not necessarily original. They are very clearly based on folk stories. Giovanni Boccaccio was as much a collector as a writer, except that in writing, of course, just like Marie de France, just like Chaucer, he adds his own flair, his own depth, his own style, his own little nuances, his own very ribald sense of humor to these stories. So and actually, Giovanni Boccaccio was more or less a contemporary of Chaucer. Chaucer is known to have actually read the Decameron. So Chaucer's compendium is actually inspired by, it's the same thing. It's a frame of people together, in this case, traveling there on pilgrimage, but telling stories. So Chaucer didn't come up with that idea. He got the idea from Giovanni Boccaccio. Yeah. So there are actually some of the stories that are in the Decameron get told in the Canterbury Tales as well. Right, which just shows, again, the interconnectedness of medieval Europe, the way literature and culture did spread beyond regional boundaries and influenced people, even if they're not from that region originally. Oh, Haas, I try to remember all of you who are here all the time, right? I know when you're here frequently. I see you. I remember you. Let me see. Villa Vendetta says most people who were made nobles in the UK at 1066 are still nobles, rich in powerful positions. They are. You're not wrong. Okay, so this is a very nice copy of the Decameron. We love this. It's in East. What was the name of the company? Uh, the Easton Press. The Easton Press makes these gorgeous leather-bound, gilt-edged editions of classic books and classic novels. And they make a really gorgeous addition to your library, but also very well sturdily bound, sewn together. This is actually sewn together. So this will tolerate repeated readings. And I just love that it comes with a built-in ribbon for marking your page. Okay, so I'm just going to warn everyone. The Decameron is bawdy. It's naughty. It is not politically correct, and it will address topics and themes that may be uncomfortable for a modern audience. So, caveat lector, reader or listener, beware. Can I haul these books around? I can. I can, but I'm strong, I guess. I don't know. Our golden doodle is named Geoffrey Chaucer. That is so cool. Okay, so we're going to do a full read through first, and then we'll go back section by section, and I'll take questions and I'll address the comments. So if you have questions, please wait until I'm done with the first read through, because I'm not going to be monitoring the chat while I'm reading for maybe obvious reasons, right? So if you have any questions, save them for after we get through the first read through. Okay. Giovanni Boccaccio, Il Decamerone. The Second Day, the 10th novel, wherein old men are wittily reprehended that will match themselves with younger women than is fit for their years, and insufficient, never considering what may happen to them. There lived in Pisa, some 100 years before Tuscany and Liguria embraced the Christian faith, a judge better stored with wisdom and ingenuity than corporal abilities of the body. He was named Signor Ricciardo di Cincenza, he being more than half persuaded that he could content a woman with such satisfaction as he daily bestowed on his studies, being a widower and extraordinary wealthy, labored with no mean payness to enjoy a fairer and youthful wife in marriage, both which qualities he should much rather have avoided if he could have ministered as good counsel to himself as he did to others, restoring to him for advice. Upon this, his amorous and diligent inquisition, it came so to pass that a worthy gentlewoman called Bertolomea, one of the fairest and choicest young maids in Pisa, whose youth did hardly agree with his age. But muck was the motive of this marriage, and no expectation of mutual contentment. The judge, being married, and the bride brought solemnly home to his house, we need make no question of brave cheer and banqueting, well furnished by their friends on either side. Other matters were now hammering in the judge's head, for, though he could please all his clients with counsel, yet now such a suit was commenced against himself, and in beauty's court of continual requests, that the judge, failing in plea for his own defense, was often non-suited for a lack of answer. Yet he wanted not good wines, drugs, and all sorts of restoratives to comfort the heart and increase good blood, but all availed not. But well fare a good courage, where performance faileth, he could liberally commend his passed jovial days, and make a promise as fair felicities yet to come. Because his youth would renew itself like to the eagle, and his vigor in as full force as before. But inside all these idle allegations, he would needs instruct his wife in an almanac or calendar, which he had formerly bought at Ravenna, and wherein he plainly showed her that there was not one day in the year, but it was dedicated to some saint or another, in reverence of whom and for their sakes he approved by diverse arguments and reasons that a man and his wife ought to abstain from bedding together, adding withal that those saints' days had their fasts and their feasts, beside the 4 seasons of the year, the vigil of the apostles, and 1,000 other holy days, with Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, in honor of our Lord's rest, and all the holy time of Lent, as also certain observations of the moon, and infinite other exceptions beside, thinking perhaps that it was as convenient for men to refrain from their wives' conversation as he did oftentime from sitting in the court. These were his daily documents to his young wife, wherewith, poor soul, she became so tired as nothing could be more irksome to her, and very careful he was lest any other should teach her what belonged to working days, because he would have her know none but holy days. It came to pass that, the season waxing extremely hot, Signor Ricciardo would go to recreate himself at his house in the country, nearer to the black mountain, where, for his fair wives' more contentment, he continued diverse days together. And for her further recreation, he gave order to have a day of fishing, he gave order to have a day of fishing, he going aboard a small pinnace among the fishers, and she in another, consorted with divers other gentlewomen, in whose company she was very well pleased. Delight made them launch further into the sea than either the judge was willing they should have done, or agreed with their own safety. For suddenly a galliot came upon them, wherein was one Pagamino, a famous pirata, who, espying the 2 pinnaces, made presently to them, and seized on that wherein the women were. When he beheld there so fair a young woman, he coveted after no other purchase, but, mounting her into his galliot in the sight of Signor Ricciardo, who by this time was fearfully landed, he carried her away with him. When Signor Judge had seen this theft, he being so jealous of his wife as scarcely he would let the air breathe on her, it were needless to know whether he was offended or no. He made a complaint at Pisa, and in other places beside, what injury he had sustained by those piratas in carrying away his wife from him, but all in vain. He neither as yet knew the man, nor what was become of him. Pagamino, perceiving what a beautiful woman she was, made the more precious estima of his purchase, and, himself being a bachelor, intended to keep her as his own, comforting her with kind and pleasing speeches, not using any ill demeanor to her, because she wept and lamented grievously. But when night came, her husband's calendar falling from her girdle, and all the fasts and feasts quite out of her remembrance, she received such courtesies from Pagamino that before they could arrive at Monaco, the judge and his law cases were almost out of memory. Such was his affable behavior to her, and she began to converse with him in a more friendly manner, and he entreated her as honorably as if she had been his espoused wife. Within a short while after, report had acquainted the judge where and how his wife was kept from him, whereupon he determined not to send, but rather to go himself in person and to redeem her from the pirate, with what summus of money he should demand. By sea, he passed to Monaco, where he saw his wife, and she him, as, soon after, she made known to Pagamino. The next morning, Signor Ricciardo, meeting with Pagamino, made meanness to be acquainted with him, and within less than an hour's space they grew into familiar conference. Pagamino, yet pretending not to know him, but expected what issue this talk would sort to. When time served, the judge discoursed the occasion of his coming thither, desiring him to demand what ransom he pleased, and that he might have his wife home with him. Whereto Pagamino answered, My lord judge, you are welcome hither, and to answer you briefly, very true it is that I have a young gentlewoman here in my house, whom I neither know to be your wife or any other man's else whatsoever. For I am ignorant both of you and her, albeit she hath remained a while here with me. If you indeed be her husband, as you seem to avouch, I will bring her to you, for you appear to be a worthy gentleman, and questionless, she cannot choose but to know you perfectly. Right. If she do confirm that which you have said, and being willing to depart hence with you, I shall rest well satisfied, and will have no other recompense for her ransom, in regard of your grave and reverend years. But what yourself shall please to give me shall be sufficient. But if it fall out other than you have affirmed, you shall offer me great wrong in seeking to get her from me, because I am a young man, and can as well maintain so fair a wife as you, or any man else that I know. Believe it certainly, replied the judge, that she is my wife. And if you please to bring me where she is, you shall soon perceive it, for she will presently cast her arms about my neck, and I durst adventure to utter loss of her. For she will presently cast her arms about my neck, and I durst adventure to utter loss of her if she deny to do it in your presence. Come on then, said Pagamino, and let us delay the time no longer. When they were entered into Pagamino's house and sat down in the hall, he caused her to be called, and she, being readily prepared for the purpose, came forth of her chamber before them both, where friendly they sat conversing together, never uttering any word unto Signor Ricciardo, or knowing him from any other stranger, that Pagamino might bring into the house with him. Which, when my lord the judge beheld, who expected to find a far more gracious welcome, he stood as a man amazed, saying to himself, Perhaps the extraordinary grief and melancholy suffered by me since the time of her loss hath so altered my wonted complexion that she is not able to take knowledge of me. Wherefore, going nearer to her, he said, Fair love, dearly have I brought your going on fishing, because never man felt the like afflictions as I have done since the day when I lost you. But by your uncivil silence, you seem as if you did not know me. Why, dearest love, seest thou not that I am thy husband Ricciardo, who am come to pay what ransom this gentleman shall demand, even in the house where now we are, so to convey thee home again upon his kind promise of thy deliverance after the payment of thy ransom. Bartolomea, turning towards him, and seeming as if she smiled to herself, thus answered, Sir, speak you to me. Advise yourself well, lest you mistake me for some other. For mine own part, I never saw you till now. How now, quoth Ricciardo, consider better what you say, look more circumspectly on me, and then you will remember that I am your loving husband, and my name is Ricciardo di Cincenza. You must pardon me, sir, replied Bartolomea. I know it is not so fitting for a modest woman to stand gazing in the faces of men, and let me look upon you never so often, certain I am that, till this instance, I have not seen you. My lord judge conceived in his mind that thus she denied all knowledge of him, as standing in fear of Pagamino, and would not confess him in his presence. Wherefore he entreated of Pagamino to afford him so much favor that he might speak alone with her in her chamber. Pagamino answered that he was well contented therewith, provided that he should not kiss her against her will. Then he requested Bartolomea to go with him alone into her chamber, there to hear what he could say, and to answer him as she found occasion. When they were come into the chamber, and none there present but he and she, Signor Ricciardo began in this manner. Heart of my heart, life of my life, the sweetest hope that I have in this world, wilt thou not know thine own Ricciardo, who loveth thee more than he doth himself? Why art thou so strange? Am I disfigured, that thou knowest me not? Behold me with a more pleasing eye, I pray thee. Bartolomea smiled to herself, and without suffering him to proceed any further in speech, returned him this answer. I would have you to understand, sir, that my memory is not so oblivious, but I know you to be Signor Ricciardo di Cinzica, and my husband by name or title. But during the time that I was with you, it very ill appeared that you had any knowledge of me. For if you had been so wise and considerate as in your own judgment the world reputed you to be, you could not be void of so much apprehension, but did apparently perceive that I was young, fresh, and cheerfully disposed, and so, by consequent, meet to know matters requisite for such young women, beside allowance of food and garments, though bashfulness and modesty forbid to utter it. But if studying the laws were more welcome to you than a wife, you ought not to have married, and you lose the worthy reputation of a judge when you fall from that venerable profession and make yourself a common proclaimer of feasts and fasting days, Lenten seasons, vigils, and solemnities due to saints, which all prohibit the household conversation of husbands and wives. Here I am now with a worthy gentleman that entertaineth me with a very honorable respect. And here I live in this chamber, not so much as hearing of feasts or fasting days, for neither Fridays, Saturdays, vigils of saints, or any lingering Lent enter at this door. But here is honest and civil conversation, better agreeing with a youthful disposition than those harsh documents wherewith you tutored me. Wherefore, my purpose is to continue here with him, as being a place suitable to my mind and youth, referring feasts, vigils, and fasting days to a more mature and staid time of age, when the body is better able to endure them, and the mind may be prepared for such ghostly meditations. Depart, therefore, at your own pleasure, and make much of your calendar, without enjoying any company of mine, for you hear my resolved determination. The judge, hearing these words, was overcome with exceeding grief, and when she was silent, thus he began. Alas, dear love, what an answer is this! Hast thou no regard of thine own honor, thy parents and friends? Canst thou rather affect to abide here for the pleasures of this man, and so sin capitally, than to live at Pisa in the state of my wife? Consider, dear heart, when this man shall wax aweary of thee, to thy shame and his own disgrace, he will reject thee. I must and shall love thee forever, and when I die, I leave thee lady and commandress of all that is mine. Can an inordinate appetite cause thee to be so careless of thine honor, and of him that loveth thee as his own life? Alas, my fairest hope, say no more, but return home with me, and now that I am acquainted with thy inclination, I will endeavor hereafter to give thee better contentment. Wherefore, dear heart, do not deny me, but change thy mind and go with me, for I never saw a merry day since I lost thee. Sir, quoth she, I desire nobody to have care of mine honor beside myself, because it cannot be here abused. And as for my parents, What respect had they of me when they made me your wife? If then they could be so careless of me, what reason have I to regard them now? And whereas you tax me that I cannot live here without capital sin, far is the thought thereof from me, for here I am regarded as the wife of Pagamino, but at Pisa you reputed me not worthy of your society. Because by the point of the Muna and the quadratures of geometry, the planets held conjunction between you and me, whereas here I am subject to no such constellations. Nevis, I hope you're listening. You say beside that hereafter you will strive to give me better contentment than you have done. Surely, in mine opinion, it is no way possible, because our complexions are so far different, as ice is from fire, or as gold from dross. As for your allegation of this gentleman's rejecting me when his humor is satisfied, should it prove to be so, as is the least part of my fear, what fortune soever shall betide me, never will I make any meanness to you, what miseries or misadventures may happen to me. But the world will afford me one resting place or other, and more to my contentment than if I were with you. Therefore, I tell you once again, to live secured from all offense to holy saints, and not to injure their feasts, fasts, vigils, and other ceremonious seasons. Here is my demorance, and from hence I purpose not to part. Our judge was now in a woeful perplexity, and confessing his folly in marrying a wife so young and far unfit for his age and ability. Being half desperate, sad, and displeased, he came forth of the chamber, using diverse speeches to Pagamino, whereof he made little or no account at all, and in the end, without any other success, left his wife there and returned home to Pisa. Their further afflictions fell upon him because the people began to scorn him, demanding daily of him what was become of his gallant young wife, making hornous with ridiculous pointings at him, whereby his senses became distracted, so that he ran raving about the streets and afterward died in a very miserable manner. Which news came no sooner to the ear of Pagamino, but in the honorable affection he bare to Bartolomea, he married her with great solemnity, banishing all fasts, vigils, and Lents from his house, and living with her in much felicity. The end. Okay, so now I encourage everyone to ask their comments. I thought she banged a sea monster because he was gay, but my reading comp isn't the strongest. She did not. Okay, so questions or comments? I love this story for so many reasons. In fact, I read it for the first time last night in choosing a text for us to discuss today. There are so many fun things about this story. One of the things that caught my attention, Nevis, if you're out there, hopefully you're still out there, is the reference to astrology as a component of the decision-making process as to whether people should engage in procreation or not. And she makes a sarcastic reference to it several times. And I just thought that was fantastic. But there's also all of these delightful euphemisms that are contained in this story. The use of conversation. We should have a conversation. It just sounds like something that modern repressed, usually Christians, Protestant Christians would use to refer to sexual intercourse, right? Your father and I are conversing. Please leave us alone. Or something parents would say to their children if their children wonder why the bedroom door is shut, right? Your father and I are conversing. We're having a conversation. I love that euphemism crops up multiple times in this story. And I haven't seen any comments for a while, so I'm going to assume that I am once again not getting shown everything. Or not. Was asking if you could fight a bear.
There's been a bunch more since then.
Yeah. Great. I don't know. I can't see them.
Did you switch?
Yes, I did.
Styles?
I did. It did not help at all. It actually seems that seems that one of the common streams has been cut off. Can I see your phone, maybe? Right. Okay. So I'm going to try to find a way to actually see the live chat comments, because the last thing I have is, Ryan, can you fight a bear? The answer is no.
As I said.
No. Right. So there's some very interesting things about this story. One is that it starts off being portrayed as an ancient story. Starts off literally with, know then that there lived in Pisa some 100 years before Tuscany and Liguria embraced the Christian faith. So this is a story that supposedly takes place in the ancient Roman world, basically, because it was ancient Rome was when those regions embraced the Christian faith, right? We're doing laundry. Your father has a headache. Okay, so let me just look at your questions and comments. Love the dress. Thank you, Tom Bender. Appreciate that compliment. Are you leaving without your phone? No? Okay. Okay, let me just scroll back. Sorry, but for whatever reason, the demons that inhabit my phone have decided not to share anything with me. Let me see. Am I a historian? Depends on what you mean by historian. I'm the creative Contessa. Some of you know me as Rachel. I am a passionate student and researcher and explorer of history, and have been since I was a little girl. So I certainly do a lot of research and reading. Do I have a PhD? No. Do I teach history? Yes. Do I teach history in schools? No, not currently. Let's see. I can hear the traffic in the background.
Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, once I to be able to broadcast this to multiple different platforms, I have to do that. Micha makes, we were doing laundry. That's pretty funny. Your father has a headache. Fantastic. We were having an argument. The phone is absolutely haunted again. 100% my phone is haunted again. Okay. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, the kidnapper was better to her. 100%. Let me see. Okay, so yes, so back to our, let me see if I can scroll forward here. Oh, no, come back. Okay, so back to our, put this here if I can see this. Okay, you're playing hide the puzzle, Jesus. Okay, so this story is one that is supposedly a very old story, and it takes place a long time ago, right? Ancient Rome, basically. So that's very interesting. So that also gives us some distance from it emotionally as a listener. So we don't have to take this as recent or current events referring to any one particular person. This is a cautionary tale. This is a morality story. And the morality story overall is that old men should not be marrying young women. And so this is one of those misconceptions about the Middle Ages, that old men married young women all the time. Not old. Yes, there were large age gaps. 10 to 15 years was the usual. But 20, 30, 40 years was not normal in the Middle Ages. It was not regarded as normal. It was not generally accepted. It happened in some very edge cases, but that wasn't socially acceptable, which is what this story shows. Stories like this tell us, give us an insight into the psyche of the era, into the ethos of the era and the people. And what stories like this can document aspects of a past society that otherwise don't really get documented in the chronicles necessarily. So this whole story is a cautionary tale mocking old men who marry young women. Probably, we actually don't know how old she was, and she wasn't necessarily a teenager. That's also a myth. Most women were not teenagers in the Middle Ages when they married. If you were a member of a royal dynasty, and it was for dynastic purposes, then you might be married officially as a child, but that marriage wouldn't get consummated until much later, until the end of your teen years often. And they actually tried to prevent young teenagers from actually engaging in procreation because they acknowledged that it was dangerous. And if you're thinking of Margaret Beaufort, that was that was regarded with a very jaundiced eye by her husband when he consummated their marriage when she was 12. Everyone knew why he was doing it. He was trying to secure her fortune. He paid, by the way, he paid for that. He died before his son was born. So God kind of smote him for that horrendous act and for such an act, a hideous act of avarice. Right. So that's the whole point of this story. If you're an old man, do not marry a young woman. But there's some really fun references to his erectile dysfunction in this story. He was, and here's the thing, he was a widower. So he's just looking for a companion. This isn't his first marriage. For all we know, he may already have children, right? So he was just looking for a companion. There are plenty of widows in this era, widows of an older age. He could have married one of those, but he went for this young woman because he wanted someone who was fair and youthful, right? And so, this comes to the question of consent. In the medieval church, consent was absolutely essential. There were no forced marriages, by which I mean there wasn't a bride. Wait, what? Darn it. Okay, we're back. Let me make sure it's still on. Okay, gremlins in my phone. Anyway, there were no forced marriages once Christianity, became the dominate religion in Europe. But there are ways to coerce people into marrying even if they're not willing, right? But consent was a very important part of a marriage. The church considered it like the most important thing, other than no consanguinity, because they acknowledged the dangers of incest. But consent was very important. But there are ways to coerce men and women to participate in a marriage in which they might not otherwise like to participate. Now, granted, she is young enough and inexperienced enough that maybe we don't know. We don't know what she actually thinks of the marriage at first. We know what she comes to think of it. Because it says here, this is really funny. The judge being married, the bride brought solemnly to his house. We need make no question of the brave cheer and the banqueting well furnished by their friends on either side. Because instead, the judge is completely focused on issues within the marriage, because such a suit was commenced against himself in beauty's court of continual requests that the judge, failing to plead for his own defense, was often non-suited by lack of an answer. Right. So there's beauty's court is a reference to, the sphere of the marriage and conjugal relations. Right. And yet he wanted meaning lacked. He lacked not good wines, drugs, all sorts of restoratives to comfort the heart and increase good blood, but all availed not. Right. So he tried everything he could afford. And apparently he could afford a lot. He tried everything, and nothing made him able to converse with his bride, right? But there's also some interesting little details contained in this paragraph about marriage in Italy in this time, in the 14th century, when this story was written. And it's about how a wedding, not just marriage, how a wedding took place. Weddings in the 14th century and even most of the 15th century in the Italies were not church affairs. It was a legal arrangement. It was a series of ceremonies and contractual signings that happened. And then eventually the thing that actually made the marriage final was the bride going to the groom's house to live, being installed in the house to live. And so we actually have court cases from the 14th and 15th century in Italy, in which a woman claims that she and man X, probably richer, someone higher up the socioeconomic ladder than she, were married because they had agreed before witnesses that they were wed, and then she had gone to live with him, right? Or that he lived with her, and therefore they were man and wife. It's a different kind of weddings in 14th and 15th century Italy. Were not these big, beautiful church affairs with people filling the pews. There were no pews actually in that era. And so it was not a religious matter in many cases. It was a question of a contractual business arrangement where vows are exchanged, where oaths are exchanged, A priest may or may not witness the exchange of those vows, but the important component is that the bride is brought solemnly home to his house. That's the final stage in an actual wedding, the wedding process of medieval and early modern Italy, right? And then they talk about that there was that at the home, this is also tells you something about the celebration for kind of the average, I mean, not average, he's obviously comfortable enough to be able to afford all sorts of good wines, drugs, and restoratives, but he's not wealthy or powerful enough to use the public square for the celebrations, right? So here we have indication that the wedding is celebrated in the home, that there's banqueting in the home, that there's good cheer, so singing, dancing, games, conversations, general merriment, drinking, right? That the wedding is celebrated in the private home. And I've seen that in multiple sources, not stories like this, but court cases actually, where the validity of a marriage is debated. And they always make reference to also the celebration of the marriage. They make reference to the fact that not only was the exchange of vows witnessed, that it was celebrated in the company of witnesses, that people helped, people toasted the new couple. So apparently it seems that the celebration of the wedding amongst friends and family was also an important component of a valid marriage. Right. Okay. Gonna look at the comments here. Shoot, darn it. I don't know why they've stopped showing to me, but there it is. Okay. Questions. Weirdly, the idea of there not being pews is like unfathomable. What did they sit on in early churches? They didn't. They didn't sit. Temples did not have temples, like ancient Roman temples, ancient Greek temples. You didn't sit. If you kneeled when it was time to kneel, otherwise you stood. Yeah, no sitting. But you have to understand, I mean, sitting for everything is a more recent development in Western civilization. Yeah, no pews in cathedrals and churches, which is why cathedrals and churches through much of medieval Europe were utilized as communal spaces for parties, for balls, for feasts, because they were in many places, in many cities and towns especially, they were the only space large enough to host large events, large social events. Medieval churches there was a different sense of sanctity about the actual building, the medieval church. There was a part within the church where the altar was, which was behind a screen, by the way. That was the sacred, the sanctified part of the church. But the part where the people stood was not really considered to be very sanctified. The chapels off to the side, that was a sanctified space. But sort of the main sanctuary was very often used for meetings, for balls, for parties, for a variety of communal affairs and events, which I know is also really hard for people to believe. It's also hard for modern people to imagine dogs being allowed to just go in and piss in the church, but that also happened, because the doors were generally left open. The doors were not often closed on medieval churches, it seems. Question. Most women were not royalty. That is absolutely true. Okay. Let's see. Just looking back through the comments, the questions. Yeah, most women were not royal. That is true. Although I don't know to what that was in connection. Most queens were forced into marriage in Christianity. Oh yeah, no, that's not true. Okay, most women were not forced to marry to be queens. Most women wanted to marry to become a queen if that option was offered to them. That was a desirable goal. In the modern world, we understand marriage to be about romance and sexual attraction, but that's a modern conceit. That is not the situation for most of human history, where civilization is involved, especially the higher up you go in society, the more marriage becomes a business arrangement or a dynastic arrangement. And for many women, the only way they could get power was by becoming queen, right? The most, and that was desirable. And in some cases, they actually, the prince and princess were able to meet beforehand. And sometimes the princess or queen to be would actually grow up in the household of the king to be, and they would actually develop genuine affection for each other. Philippa of Hainaut and Edward III are are a good instance of this. So most queen in Christianity, most queens were not forced into marriage. They actually were perfectly fine with it. They accepted it. They were raised that was the goal. The idea of having a romantic love-based marriage it's not a pre-modern concept. It is very often mutual respect would develop between a husband and a wife, and sometimes that would flourish into love. Sometimes they would fall passionately in love with one another. That did happen, but it wasn't a requirement, and it wasn't an expectation. So it's erroneous to think that these women were all forced into marriage. No. Many of them wanted to have children. They wanted to be mothers, and marriage was the way you did that. And they wanted the prestige and power that being a married woman could give you, depending on when and where you are, via your husband, or, as the queen, as the duchess, as the countess, as the lady of the castle, whatever. There isn't as much forcing happening as people think there was. Did it happen? Certainly, but also for the men. Men didn't always want to get married either. So just putting that out there. Let me see. Did some marry their relatives? Yes. So even though it wasn't allowed by the church, consanguinity, you were supposed to prove that you weren't related within 7 degrees. You could get a papal dispensation to marry a relative. That didn't happen as often in the earlier Middle Ages, but as power starts consolidating, as the Middle Ages wane on and more houses combine and states start centralizing, then increasingly we have a case of first it's just second cousins marrying, and then eventually we end up with first cousins marrying, and that's why we have the mess that is the Habsburgs. So yes, sometimes relatives did marry. It didn't happen as often in the earlier Middle Ages. The later you get, the more often it happened. And then by the modern era, it's just a freaking mess. By the modern era, it's a disgusting mess. It's cousins marrying cousins. And you want to talk about genetic issues? That's why, there's an issue with hemophilia in a lot of noble and royal families by the end of the 19th century, in Europe specifically. Okay. Let's see. Early churches sound like modern community centers. That is exactly how a good way to phrase it. Yep. I forget what century it was when weddings were moved inside rather than being out on the church building's front or side porch. Yeah, so that transition seems to. So I haven't been able to find a clean transition. Like, it's a gradual change. There is some evidence that it's happening by the end of the 15th century. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a big part of the Reformation, right? But also the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age may have driven people indoors for those kinds of ceremonies. It wouldn't surprise me because, the transition does seem gradual. We've got reference of weddings happening on the church porch and then mass being heard. It wouldn't surprise me if by, the 15th century, things are starting to get really cold, especially in Northern Europe. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that's what really ultimately drives people to go inside to have these ceremonies. And also that, especially with the Reformation, those Protestant churches really want to control people's lives really hard. Contrary to popular belief, the Catholic Church isn't the only church in history that has wanted or sought to control people's lives. The Reformation churches were all part of that. That general ethos. So it wouldn't surprise me if they also wanted to control marriage more closely and make it more of a religious matter. And by moving things inside, that made it more so. But I honestly think it may have been the Little Ice Age, may have impacted the moving from the front or side of the church to inside the church. And then also churches started making money from hosting weddings. You would actually pay to host a wedding inside the church. And because candles are not cheap, right? So there is that. Okay, just checking the comments. Let me see. Okay. Do we get another story after this one? We will see. Standing in church, where do I not sign up? Don't go back in time. And actually, so the pews really start coming about in the 16th century, and I think it's with the rise of the Protestant sermonizers, because there are sermonists in the Catholic Church. It's not that there aren't preachers, but it really seems to take a whole new length with the Protestant Reformation, especially with the Puritans and the the people of those ilks, where they just go on for hours and hours preaching about fire and brimstone. Anyway, okay, so back to this man who has taken all manner of remedies, but none of them have actually availed him in any way, right? So the man, he actually runs into an issue because his young wife realizes that there is something missing, and she starts making requests of him, right? And he decides that he'll distract her with reason and with religious practice. So he actually gives her an almanac, a calendar, which he had bought at Ravenna, which is an interesting just little side detail. And he uses this almanac to show her that basically every day of the year is a holy day of observance of some kind. And in the Middle Ages, if you were a strictly observant Christian in Western Europe, you were supposed to abstain from conversation on all of these holy days, on saints' feast days, on Lenten days, on the 4 seasons of the year. Those are the ember days, the 4 times of year when you're not supposed to engage in any sort of worldly, fleshly activities on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, right? The vigils of the apostles and 1,000 other holy days, although of course there's only so many days in a year, but exaggeration for the point of making the point, right? And on Fridays you're supposed to abstain, Saturdays, and of course Sundays as well, being the Lord's Day of Rest. And he also makes reference to certain observations of the Muna, meaning these astrological calculations that stipulate that on this day it's not the right day to engage in those kinds of activities. So basically, he convinces her that there really is no good day for a conversation, and he purposefully tries to keep her from interacting with people who might drop the dime on him and indicate that there are actually working days and not just holy days. And on the working days, as it says here, she became so tired as nothing could be more irksome to her, and very careful he was, lest any other should teach her what belonged to working days, because he would have her know none but holy days. So I find it very interesting that they make that distinction here, that holy days were not a day for disportation, but working days, which most people now would associate with just pure drudgery, were a day for disportation. It's a completely different attitude, right? Nowadays, it's the holidays when people converse. And on working days, people are generally too tired to converse. So a complete inversion of the medieval paradigm to the modern one, right? Which I found very interesting. Yep. Let me see. The almanac was first published by Benjamin Franklin. It was not. There were almanacs before Benjamin Franklin, many of them. So no, that's another of those American exceptionalist myths. There were almanacs for centuries and centuries and centuries. He published a farmer's almanac, but it's not the first one that was published. Let me see. What was Lent like during the Middle Ages? Lent was a period of fasting, and a period during which people were supposed to abstain from any fleshly pleasures. They weren't supposed to make merry. They weren't supposed to sing worldly songs. They weren't supposed to dance. They were only supposed to eat a very limited diet that excluded meat, cheese, and dairy products. They were supposed to live very modestly. They were supposed to basically observe the privations that Jesus experienced in his 40 days in the desert before he took up his public ministry. Right. So Lent in the medieval period was supposed to be a time of solemnity and of privation. And it was much more strictly observed than it is now. In fact, we read yesterday with Alessandra Strozzi, a patrician woman living in 15th century Florence, how she felt that the Lenten fasting had actually deteriorated her constitution and caused her digestive issues, abdominal, like some kind of gastrointestinal issues. So it seems that the Lenten period was actually a pretty severe period of observance, which is why the carnival period that preceded it was one of the reasons that it was so, superfluously insane, right? So yeah, Lent was a serious period of observance, especially for those who actually adhered to all of these strictures. Now, you may be asking me, did everyone adhere to all of these severe strictures? I doubt it, because we have records of people getting penance for not doing so, but I expect that on the whole, these sorts of strictures were observed, wherein there is some complication, however, because certain holy days and holy days of observance that fall on specific dates end up falling within that Lenten period some years, but other years they don't. So I also read yesterday or 2 days ago a chronicler, a gentleman from 1502, commenting about the dichotomy, the confusing dichotomy of celebrating a very somber day, that being Good Friday, on the same day that you also celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation, and how there were people trying to do both. They were trying to do maybe a period of the day when they were engaged in solemn, somber observance and prayer, and then on another part of the day they were engaged in feasting and celebration of the joy of the Annunciation and the Savior to come. Right? So there seems to have sometimes been some confusion about how to approach some of these specific observances when they overlapped. So did everyone always strictly observe the Lenten rules? Probably not. I suspect most people did most of the time, though. Let me see. The almanac versus an almanac. Yeah. Yes, the beaver. At some point, the church did reclassify the beaver and anything that lived in water, including ducks and geese and other waterfowl, as being fish. But that was not the whole Middle Ages. Catherine, I love it. Sorry, baby doll. My peenie weenie doesn't work on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday this week. Let's check the calendar. Yeah. Okay. So back to our story here. She obviously grows weary of this. She is not dumb, right? We get the idea that this young lady, she might be relatively unwell versed in the worldly ways, but she is not stupid. And so eventually he decides that they're going to go to the country. And this is one of those parts of the story where we understand that, yes, even in the 14th century, at the very least, there was an idea of a vacation. Some of you have asked me, did medieval people take vacations? And I've said, well, sort of. Pilgrimages were kind of vacation. But here we have an example of something that is very clearly a vacation in the modern sense in the 14th century. So now, once I read this story, I went, oh yeah, I have read about people doing this in the past. This whole story, the whole frame is a kind of vacation from the plague, right? These 10 noblemen going to Fiesole to the country. So there is very clearly in the Italy's, at the very least, this idea of going to the country to get away from the trials and tribulations and anxieties of city life. And here they go to the country, right? He would recreate himself at his house in the country, which was nearer to the Black Mountain, which was apparently also nearer to the sea, right? And he brought his wife there, hoping for her fair contentment, right? That she would be distracted by the beauty of the countryside, the leisure, the beautiful, relaxed life that would provide for them. And he talks about fishing as an act of recreation. So that's also an interesting reference to the difference between angling, which is the very inefficient process of line catching fish on a single rod, versus fishing the way professional fishermen did for most of history, using nets, right? So here we have evidence of, even in the 14th century, angling, fishing, pole fishing being a leisure activity of the well-heeled, right? Because he arranges for them to go fishing, and then they have a day of fishing, and then he arranges for them to go on these boats, these pinnaces, which are relatively small boats. And he actually pays the fishermen to take them out into the sea. And because it was such a beautiful day, delight made them launch further into the sea than either the judge was willing they should have done, or agreed with their own safety. Foreshadowing. For suddenly, a pirate ship comes along, right? So this is a pirate story, but this is like a nice pirate story. So I love these references to piracy in a much broader historical context, because so many people get bound up in the pirate look, right? The Pirates of the Caribbean pirate look, you know, the typical 17th, 18th century pirate look, the Peter Pan pirate look. But piracy has been around probably as long as there have been ships carrying goods, or boats at all, because pirates can also use boats to go and raid other people's settlements, right? So there have been pirates for as long as there's been human civilization, not just a 17th, 18th century thing. And there are no special pirate clothes. There are sailor clothes, right? So here we have a 14th century pirate, although 14th century, but also apparently ancient Roman, based on the way the story has been framed as being from the time before Christianity was adopted in Liguria. And this galliot, as it's called, basically espies the ship carrying all these lovely women and seizes it. And so, of course, we think, oh God, this is not going to end well for this young woman. Oh, no, it's exactly what she wanted and needed to happen, right? So Signor Ricciardo, of course, has gone back. He retreated in fear of the pirate. So not exactly a swashbuckling, brave, and bold type. Not that we expected him to be, considering his years and reverend age. And, he goes and he actually goes back to Pisa, and he actually lodges complaints, as though the authorities in Pisa can do anything about this. So what's interesting is that it seems that Monaco in this era is a haven for pirates. And that stands up, as far as I know, from what I know about the history of Monaco and how it came to be what it is, right? So Monaco is known as a haven for pirates in this era. Gotta love that little detail. Now it's kind of, I don't know if you count running a casino in order to operate your little tiny mini principality still a form of piracy or not. Okay, let me go back to the comments and just see what you all may have asked. Okay, wait. Is this just Ye Olde Princess Bride, right? It's a little bit like Ye Olde Princess Bride. It would not surprise me if the author of The Princess Bride had read this story, right? Because the author of The Princess Bride was very erudite, well-read individual. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some inspiration there. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Wait, subscribers only mode? Oh yeah, okay, someone changed that. Okay, got it. Okay, so Monaco, but what we have that follows is actually a very beautifully depicted courtship scene, right? So this is actually a really happy story for this young woman, for Bartolomea, right? Because she's not courted, right? This old man goes and basically goes shopping for a bride. He finds this family, he arranges for the marriage to happen. She's brought to his house. There's no courtship, there's no wooing, and he's an old man who can't converse with her. So here she finally gets that whole romantic experience, which also indicates, is another insight into the mindset of this era, that despite the fact that marriage might not have been about romance, people still wanted what we now understand as romance, right? People still wanted the thrill of being courted, of being wooed, of being treated like someone desirable and valuable in multiple senses of those terms, right? So yes, basically people are the same and have been the same. It's just that it wasn't necessarily expressed through marriage, this romance. And that is a big part of the whole courtly love, the fin amour, the medieval courtly love tradition, is the idea that you're not necessarily going to love a person with whom you've been contracted to marry because you don't really know them, but you can love someone else for certain. Right? And here it is. Pagamino, perceiving what a beautiful woman she was, made the more precious esteem of his purchase. Not in a literal sense of an exchange, but purchase isn't something that you take, right? Have you ever heard the expression to gain purchase? on a, if you're climbing and you need to gain purchase, this is the older meaning of that word here. This is 17th century English. Oh, I didn't say that at the beginning. So I'm reading from a 1620 translation by John Florio, an English translation made in 1620s, the earliest complete translation of the Decameron. John Florio was a bilingual English-Italian speaker. One parent was English, one parent was Italian. He actually also wrote an Italian-English dictionary in 1600, or published it in 1602, 3 or 4, and or 4. So we actually have an English-Italian dictionary dating from this era. And so that's why this English occasionally sounds like Shakespeare, because he's a contemporary of Shakespeare. And I think he also wrote plays as well, in fact. Okay, so hence the older meaning of, hence the older use of the word purchase. So Pagamino, perceiving what a beautiful woman he was, and himself being a bachelor, which it's fun to see that word bachelor here in the early 17th century, intended to keep her as his own, comforting her with kind and pleasing speeches, not using any ill demeanor to her, because she wept and lamented grievously. So Pagamino is presented as being a good pirate. He is the dread pirate Roberts. Right? He's a good guy. He is being framed as being a gentle man, a good man who's not going to force himself on women, and he's going to converse with her and see where the conversation goes in both meanings of that word, right? She was weeping and lamenting grievously, but when night came, her husband's calendar falling from her girdle. A girdle is a belt, just so we're clear on that. A girdle is a belt. Something that may have looked like this, actually, in that era. A girdle is a belt. A calendar falling from her girdle, and all the fasts and feasts quite out of her remembrance, she received such courtesies from Pagamino that before they could arrive at Monaco, the judge and his law cases were almost out of memory. Such was his affable behavior to her, and she began to converse with him in a more friendly manner and he entreated her as honorably as if she had been his espoused wife. So it's very clear that there's a whole wooing and courtship that is extremely gentle, and that she has decided she doesn't need to keep the strictures of these holy days and these observances, and has forgotten them entirely. So it is very clear here that this is a very consensual relationship. In fact, she being young and virile and energetic might actually become an aggressor in this situation. Okay, let me check the comments. Oh. Maybe he was captain of the Black Pearl. Can you imagine getting kidnapped by an old-time Roman dread pirate Roberts? What a dream come true. Lucky bird. Yeah, right? It's living the dream. Bartolomeo is living the dream. Okay. So, of course, eventually the judge got reports of where his wife was and how she was kept from him. And so he resolves he's going to take his courage in his hand, and he is going to go to Monaco and retrieve her himself. I mean, props to him, right? Props to him. He is elderly enough that he cannot converse with her. So props to him for having the guts to go to Monaco and face this man who is a pirate after all, and to try to offer a ransom for her. I cannot fault him. I mean, at least there's that. It would have been, you know, more laughable and more reproachable and reprehensible had he sent some messenger to do it. But him going in person, I have to compliment that. But what's really funny is that, you know, our dread pirate Roberts here, our pirate who never gets, Pagamino, our dread pirate Pagamino is savvy. He knows what's going to happen. He also knows that his Bartolomea is not going to want to go back with this old man. Like, they've probably talked. She has no doubt told him about what her married life was like, and he probably laughed heartily at her descriptions of it. I'm confident their actual conversations involved her asking him, is it not true that everyone lives this way? And her finding out that no one, very few people, abstain from sexual intercourse for 365 days a year. So he comes for her and she pretends not to know him, right? Which is really funny, because he's acting like this lovesick man, and it's actually a little sad. This part's a little hard to read for me, because he actually seems to have genuine affection for her, and it has to be real affection because he can't seem to have the physical affection for her. So he actually appreciates her beauty, he appreciates her presence, he appreciates the comfort she brings him, and probably he appreciates her energy. So yeah, there is a question, does he actually love her, or does he love what her presence does for him? And that's a different, have any of us really asked ourselves that question? Do we love our spouses or our partners, or do we love how they make us feel or what they do for us, right? Those are not necessarily the same thing. So very clearly, he at least loves what she does for him in terms of being this beautiful, youthful presence all around him, filling a space with her energy and her vivacity, right? So he loves that. And they make mention of her being beautiful multiple times. So, we humans, we've evolved to like beautiful things. We aren't superficial. I hate the argument that people who appreciate beauty are superficial, because beauty is something for which we have evolved to appreciate. This is part of our evolutionary process. And psychologically, being surrounded by beautiful surroundings, hearing beautiful sounds, having things that feel nice to the touch is beneficial for us. It is not superficial to appreciate beauty. It might be superficial to only base your appreciation on physical beauty, but it's not superficial to have an appreciation for beauty in general. In fact, it's a deeply seated psychological need. So I'll fight you on that. Let me see, comments. Regardless of the time period, every person wants their partner in life to treat them honorably, honestly, and with respect and decorum commensurate to their position in life and as their spouse. Absolutely, Nietzsche, 100%. Catherine comments very wisely. Or does he the judge love the idea of himself still being young? Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. That's a good point. If having this youthful, vivacious woman around him makes him feel younger. In fact, there's a reference to that earlier, that her presence does make him feel younger, that he feels that she can restore him to youth, which she obviously can't, nor can anything apparently. Yep. Other comments? Yep. My mom has figured out Facebook messages. Oh no, I'm sorry or not sorry? Which should I be? Depends on your mom, I guess. Yep. Okay, so he comes, he tries to offer a ransom, and our dread pirate Pagamino basically says, I'm not keeping her here. If she acknowledges that you're her husband and she wants to go with you, then she can go, right? And it's very clear that this isn't a ploy. He's serious, but he also knows, and probably they've had this discussion, that she's not going anywhere. But this is more of he's the good pirate. And this is definitely not to say that there were actually pirates that were like this. This is a story. This is fiction, right? So just keep that in mind. So she pretends that she doesn't know him, right? She treats him like any stranger that Pagamino would have brought into the house. And they even make reference to the fact that she has her own chambers, right? So he has honored her really just like his wife. He has set her up with her own apartments in their home. He treats her respectfully. She probably hosts and entertains for him, right? They've created this idyll. And we find out that everyone everyone already views her as being his lawfully wed wife, because this brings us back to the idea of what makes a wife. What makes a wife? Monaco is it's an traditionally an Italian speaking part of Europe, even in this era. The Garibaldi family are the noble family who were in power by this era, right? And so there as well, I'm pretty certain the idea of, if you go to a man's house and live like his wife, performing the wifely functions, you get viewed as the wife. So even if he had tried to set her aside, I think in her heart of hearts, she knows that she could go to the local courts and say, we've been living like man and wife. I am a gentlewoman. He is a gentleman. We are therefore equal. He therefore needs to honor his commitment to me. And I think the courts would have ruled in their favor, her favor. They do in Florence as well rule in the favor of women who are in a similar situation, even when those women are of a lower socioeconomic standing. So imagine a gentlewoman going to the court and saying, well, this dread pirate Pagamino tried to set me aside, but he brought me, literally carried me across the sea to his home and installed me, and I've been functioning as his wife. He still owes me. I'm confident that the courts in Monaco would have ruled in her favor, because that was the trend in this era. So that's an interesting little bit of subtext that the original readers in the 14th or 15th century in the Italies would have had as just part of their understanding of how the world works. So my feeling is that no 14th or 15th century person in the Italies or the places of Italian influence would have worried for her being set aside by the dread pirate Pagamino, because everyone knew that she had a case. Right? These little, this is what happens when you read things like court cases and a variety of documentary evidence from an era, and then you read the fiction from the era, and you can see all of these real world situations being reflected back in the literature, and everything makes so much more sense. Yeah. Okay, comments or questions? Again, yes, Rosemary says like common law marriage, exactly. Yeah, and especially if there were witnesses to any sorts of vows being exchanged, yeah. Depend on how much money the guy has, very corrupt back then. So Eddie, so yes and no. So in the case of Florence, the local courts were much less influenced by money, much less. But when it went up before the papal curia, the case I'm thinking of specifically, for review, then some money exchanged hands and the decision was overturned. But it depends on the level of court, and it depends on when and where. Remember, Europe is not a monolith over the 1,000 years of history or regionally. And just because we think everything was corrupt doesn't mean it actually was corrupt all the time. There were people who had actually had a moral compass in the pre-modern world. Just like today, there are judges who have a moral compass and there are judges who don't. Same thing. I can tell you from my understanding, medieval society was not really any more corrupt than modern society is. People will people. Yeah. And the Middle Ages was a time of law. It really was. Lots of laws. Cities had statutes and regulations and enforcement mechanisms, and they did enforce them. And we have lots of cases of people on the lower end of the socioeconomic stratum actually suing people of higher rank and winning lawsuits. So it isn't as clean cut as we like to think it is. Actually, I would say there might be more injustice in that regard in the modern world, because in the medieval world, it wasn't about lawyers arguing for you or being able to afford a billion-dollar lawyer that hadn't the law practice hadn't gotten to that level of development. Although it seems by Shakespeare's time it probably had. Yeah. Okay. Oh, darn it. No. Okay. Why is it like this? Sorry, everyone. For whatever reason, the comments have stopped showing up where I can actually see them. Oh, I'm going to try something. Stay with me, guys. Okay, we're back. Nope, that didn't help. Oh, well. Okay. Okay, witch trials in England. Witch trials postdate the medieval period, everyone. Hate to tell you this. That is a myth about the Middle Ages. The witch trials that everyone thinks about are 17th century. There are very, very, very few witch trials in the Middle Ages, and most of them are against men, and very often they're aimed at powerful rich people, because the goal is to get their money. There are very few witch trials in the Middle Ages. Yeah. So no, that's not an example of corruption of the Middle Ages. We have to differentiate between the medieval and the modern world. The medieval world, in my definition, ends with the Reformation. After that, it's the modern world, right? So if you start looking at the more or less, you want to assign it a year 1500-ish, right? If you look before that, it's a very different society, and witch trials don't start in earnest until the end of the 16th century, and then in the 17th century is when you have the witch craze, sadly. Yeah. Yeah, Theostry. Theo is trying. Theo, thank you for coming back. I remember that name is very unique, so it's good to have you back again. Okay. Yep. Sorry, but witch trials not an example of anything in the Middle Ages. Yeah, one of the more prominent, a lot of the prominent cases of witch trials I can think of were of men. In Greenland, at the early 15th century, one of the last recorded things we know that happens in the European colony in Greenland is a man is tried of witchcraft for using his magic powers to seduce the wife of another man. He is found guilty and he is executed. But that's a man, that's not a woman. And it's very few. There are so few witch trials in the Middle Ages that it's kind of easy to remember the cases. But the 17th century, Europe goes off the rails. The 30 Years' War is part of the reason it goes off the rails. The Reformation is another reason it goes off the rails. Okay, so back to Pagamino, right? So she pretends to not know her husband. Bartolomea pretends to not know Ricciardo, right? She pretends that she doesn't recognize him. And so this gives her a chance to have a private audience with him where they converse in the real sense of that word. And it's really interesting because Pagamino only allows this private audience provided that this elderly gentleman promised to not kiss her against her will. Right. And so it's this very little interesting detail into Pagamino's, psyche. It's like, no, women should be treated well. Don't try to force yourself on her, you dirty old man. So they get the audience. She gives him the audience. And then she fully confesses, of course, I know you. Right. She says, I know you to be Signor Ricciardo di Cinzica, but my husband by name or title. But during the time I was with you, it very ill appeared that you had any knowledge of me. And this is absolutely a very clever double entendre, right? Because to know someone, especially in the 17th century, that is used in the Old Testament to refer to sexual relations, right? And he knew her, right? And so this is a 17th century English translation of this 14th century text. And so this here, that you had any knowledge of me, is a very clear double entendre. For if you had been so wise and considerate as the world reputed you to be, you could not help but perceive that I was young, fresh, and cheerfully disposed, and by consequent meet to know matters requisite for such young women, beside the allowance of food and garments, though bashfulness and modesty forbid to utter it, right? So she's saying there is more to being a husband than providing clothing and food for your wife, right? You should also provide these conjugal activities that I can't really talk about because I'm a modest and bashful lady, right? But you didn't provide that, so how are you my husband, right? And then she mentions multiple times how he did nothing but inundate her with proclamations of feasts and fasting days, Lenten seasons, vigils, and solemnities due to saints, which prohibit the household conversation of husbands and wives. I'm going to start using that euphemism. Conversations of husbands and wives, conversations between husbands and wives. We should converse tonight. Right? Okay. Back to our questions. No in the biblical sense. Exactly. Yeah. No in the biblical sense. Yep. Exactly. Okay. So, and then she says, here, am I now with a worthy gentleman that entertaineth me with very honorable respect. And here I live in this chamber, not so much hearing of any feasts or fasting days, neither Fridays, Saturdays, vigils of saints, or any lingering Lent. Enter at this door, right? So here in this chamber, we do not observe those sorts of restrictions. And basically she's saying, in this chamber, we get it on. It's Pagamino who enters this chamber, and we don't talk. We converse. Wherefore, my purpose is to continue here with him as being a place suitable to my mind and youth, referring feasts, vigils, fasting days to a more mature and staid time of age, when the body is better able to endure them, and the mind may be prepared for such ghostly meditations. Ghostly in the 17th century means spiritual. It's really funny because it also can mean holy, like the Holy Ghost, right? So the term crops up in a bunch of different stories here. The ghostly father, it's not the dead father's ghost, it's a priest. Right. So it's just funny, such ghostly meditations. She literally is saying here that it is unhealthy for a young and nubile and fertile woman to restrain herself from these fleshly activities. When we're older, that is the time when we can observe them. And so she's literally telling him, this is a very eloquent way of saying, you are too old for me, sir. You are too old for me. And then the judge lays on this guilt trip, and he actually lays on the threat of societal condemnation, a capital offense, to sin so capitally by living in sin with a man. Hast thou no regard of thine own honor, thy parents and friends? And here's where he says, consider, dear heart, when this man shall wax weary of thee. Meaning he knows, he's like, he's going to tire of you. Not if, but when he shall wax weary of thee. To thy shame and his own disgrace, he will reject thee. Right. And this is where I'm mentioning she doesn't care, because she knows she has a case, a really strong case in this era, actually. Not that she thinks he's going to do that, because clearly he doesn't. And he offers to love her forever if she'll just come back to him, and even says he acknowledges that he knows he's not young and that he's probably not long for this world. He says, I must and shall love thee forever, and when I die, I leave thee lady, capital L, and commandress of all that is mine. Right? So he's basically saying, if you put up with my decrepit self for another couple of years, then you're going to be wealthy and you're going to be in control. And that is actually potentially a tempting offer, because I've often said that in the Middle Ages, pre-modern world in many cases, one of the best things to be is a wealthy widow, not a wealthy wife, a wealthy widow, because wealthy widows had agency. Wealthy widows somehow operated outside of the patriarchy. They were no longer owned and controlled by a man. And they had money and they had resources, so they could enjoy a fruitful life. That the wife of Bath keeps remarrying despite being actually pretty comfortably off shows that she just likes men. But she doesn't have to. She doesn't have to in order to live a comfortable life. So this is actually potentially a real temptation for a woman in her station in this era, that she won't have to put up long with this decrepit old man. And then she will be the commandress of her own life, and a wealthy one, right? Oh, wow. Did we finally? I don't know from Twitch, damn it. Okay, comments. Please get tired of me so I can be free of your foolish self. Yeah. Why decrepit? Why is he decrepit? He's a very old man, and we learn decrepit in the sense of his parts aren't working anymore. Right? We know that from the beginning of the story, where he talks about not being able to converse with his wife, despite taking all sorts of remedies for it. Strong wine, which is supposed to boost the manly stamina and boost the blood and give him good blood, right? One of the humors, right? We know that he's taking, like it says, literally, that he takes drugs, the best available. And all sorts of recreation that is supposed to boost and balance the humors towards the carnal, and it doesn't work. So at some level, he is decrepit, and he is described as being a very old man. So there's definitely some important things not functioning. So decrepit in the sexual sense, he is decrepit. His parts don't work anymore, right? And then we have this really great rebuttal from her that is also offers a window into the way people thought in this era. And there's this assumption that honor was everything, and that women just blindly obeyed their parents and obeyed their husbands, and they were very obedient, especially in Italy, which was a patriarchal society, 100%. Had been since the Roman Empire, probably was not during the Etruscan, but I say probably because no real records have survived from that era. Anyway, so here she rebuts, and she says, "Sir, I desire nobody to have care of mine honor beside myself." Right? Here's a woman in the 14th century saying, I don't need you to give me a good reputation, and I don't want you to. I am my own person. I will make or break my own reputation, and I don't care what other people think. That's kind of revolutionary, honestly, considering what most people understand women's roles and place to be in this society. As for my parents, what respect had they of me when they made me your wife? Right? So she actually, this shows, again, interesting insight, that she resents her parents for arranging this marriage with this decrepit old man. So that's what I meant when I said she wasn't necessarily forced, but she might not have been given better options or other options, right? She may have been coerced into it, not knowing that with which she might have not even been introduced to him at all. She might have had no idea that he was an old man when she agreed to this marriage, right? Right. So, my parents clearly didn't respect me when they made this happen. Why should I respect them? That is mind-blowing. When I read those lines, that was mind-blowing coming from a woman in 14th century Italy. Really, I was taken aback by that. Very interesting. And if then they could be so careless of me, what reason have I to regard them now? Basically, she's saying, I owe them nothing. I owe them squat. They owe me, in fact. Right. Okay. Comments or questions? 65 years old, my cousin wife says my parts work just fine. I'm glad to hear it, Tom. Apparently this man's do not. He tried everything, and instead of admitting that his parts didn't work, he basically convinces her that there's no day of the year when they are allowed to have sex based on religious observance and also astrology. So, yeah. Old men back then could be like 55. Yeah. Yeah, a history book is absolutely a long story. I agree with that 100%. Yep. Okay, so this man was decrepit in a literal sense, but he's called old at the beginning. This isn't me. They call him old, right? This is. They actually say. Remember the little summary at the beginning is the 10th novel, wherein old men are wittily reprehended that they will match themselves with younger women than is fit for their years and insufficient, never considering what may happen to them. So we're told he's an old man, right? And we're told that he's decrepit. And in many, many ways, we're told that he is decrepit, right? So this Bartolomea is saying, there's no reason for me to care what my parents think or if this reflects badly on them, because they didn't care about me when they arranged this thing that is wrongfully called a marriage. Interestingly, non-consummation would have absolutely been grounds for a complete annulment, not a divorce, but an annulment, a cancellation of the marriage. If Bartolomea wanted to and could have proven that the marriage had never been consummated, then she could have gotten out of it. But this was more fun. Getting kidnapped by the dread pirate Pagamino was clearly a better option than an annulment. Annulments are lengthy, awful legal processes. Being kidnapped by the dread pirate Pagamino, much better form of annulment. Okay. And she says, and whereas you tax me that I cannot live here without capital sin, far is the thought thereof for me, for here I am regarded as the wife of Pagamino, right? So here she tells us, this implies again that marriage, what counts as a legitimate marriage, is almost as much about the living arrangement as it is about any kind of ceremony that is actually held. And she says, because by the point of the moon and the quadratures of geometry and the planets held conjunction between you and me, you reputed me not worthy of your society, right? So here she's blaming astrology also, because apparently when it wasn't a holy day, he then fell back on astrology to make the rest of the days unsexable. So we just had Nevis. I don't know if Nevis is still out there or not, but we just had Nevis on the channel almost 2 weeks ago at this point. God, where's the time gone? And he talked to us about astrology in the Middle Ages. And one of the questions I kept asking was, how did it impact people's daily lives? And it's stories like this that tell us how it impacted people's daily lives, at least some people. So apparently some people may have actually used astrological prognostication and the reading of the heavens to determine when they could or could not have sex, whether to procreate or otherwise. So here is a prime example of how astrology in the Middle Ages impacted this woman's daily life on a daily basis. And it's very interesting because many people would think, modern people think, well, thank God she got out of having sex with that old man. But she didn't thank God for it. It seems she didn't care so much that he was elderly. She cared that he lied to her and deceived her, and that he wasn't able to perform his husbandly duties. So that is also an interesting difference between the way we modern people look back on these age disparate marriages versus how maybe a woman in the era would have viewed it, right? So the decrepit part is literally having to do with his conversational abilities. Okay, let me just go to the comments again. If you're enjoying this, then please like and subscribe, everyone. And I'd like to thank my channel members and patrons and subscribers on Facebook for supporting my work financially. I'd like to thank all of you who've also left super chats today. Appreciate it, everyone. Okay, let me see. Let me see. He must have Saturn in all his signs if he cannot get his parts to work. Good point, Eddie. Nice. Oh, let me see. Oh, Micha, appreciate that gift. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. The astrology aspect is very interesting, isn't it, though? So it's stories like these where we can find unexpected details about the history of daily life, which is one of the reasons I love reading these stories. She may have very much wanted children. Clearly, she wanted parties and dances. Yeah, 100% Micha. Absolutely. Agree with that interpretation. And clearly, she wanted romance. It's very clear she wanted romance because we have that whole paragraph about how the dread pirate Pagamino woos her very gently and very respectfully as though she were his own wife, right? So clearly she wanted that as well. Don't we all? I mean, men and women, don't we all want to be wooed? Okay, so you say beside that hereafter you will strive to give me better contentment than you have done. Surely, in mine opinion, is it no way possible because our complexions are so far different as ice is from fire or as gold from dross. So basically she's saying, no, we are completely ill-matched. And the complexion could be in terms of personality, but it could also be in terms of energy because he is a very elderly gentleman and she is young and energetic, and just their energies do not mix at all. And especially now that she's had a taste of the dread pirate Pagamino, there's no going back, right? She realizes what life can offer, and Ricciardo is not what she wants. She realizes that they would never have probably had a really great conversation anyway. Right? She says, there's no way you can content me. As for your allegation of this gentleman's rejecting me when his humor is satisfied, should it prove to be so, as it is the least part of my fears, like I'm not worried about him. We've got a really good thing going on here. What fortune soever shall betide me, never will I make any meanness to you, what miseries or misadventures may happen to me. So she's, I mean, this is a pretty hard burn. She is saying, I don't care what awful thing befalls me if he should reject me. I will not be coming back to you. I don't care. Nothing could drive me back into your house, let alone your arms, right? But the world will afford me one resting place or another, and more to my contentment than if I were with you. Right? And that's also a very interesting idea to hear coming from a woman in 14th century Italy, that she would rather reject the security of a situation in which she is living in the household of a respected judge, a man who clearly has a decent pool of financial resources. She would rather be subjected to the vicissitudes of a cruel and cold world and what dangers may befall her thereby than go and be with him as a wife again. That's a very strong statement, because that's not normal. Because in this era, for women, socioeconomic security was very important, and marriage played a big part in that. But maybe we overread the importance to women of marriage. For actually, indeed, there were alternatives to marriage for women to have socioeconomic security, and not just entering a convent, although that was one good way for women to have agency in their lives, to be basically their own mistresses, and to have a secure living situation. But there are also these beguinages, which basically evolved in the Low Countries, in Flanders and what's now the Netherlands and Belgium, basically in northern France. These beguinages were communities made by women for women that were basically microeconomies. Women lived there and worked together there. They built homes. They had their own fields and farms. They did their own weaving. They did their own spinning. They were basically independent little communities within communities, and they were often endowed by wealthy patrons looking to, again, shorten their time in purgatory. And they didn't have to get married, so they had a third option. Or fourth option. It wasn't just be married, live with your family as a spinster, unmarried for the rest of your life, enter a convent. Or the fourth option was find one of these beguinages and join them. So maybe we have been overreading the importance of marriage and a stable situation to women in this era. And in fact, I was recently reading a bunch of tax returns from medieval Paris. I know that doesn't sound terribly exciting, but it is. And there are numerous tax returns in which men live with men and women live with women. And we shouldn't overinterpret that as that being necessarily a homosexual relationship. But it seems that unmarried men and women who didn't want to marry or couldn't marry because of their financial situation would then live together so that they shared the economic burden of a home. So that was another option to getting married for socioeconomic security, was if you're a woman, finding another woman to live with, or if you're a man, finding another man to live with, and then maintaining a household together. I'm not going to wander down. This isn't a conversation about homosexuality in the Middle Ages. I will shortly say, yes, it was a thing. Yes, we have evidence of it. Yes, there were trans people. I have a whole presentation on that on YouTube if you want to look into it. There's been a couple of live streams we've done on it. Lots of evidence to present. But I also don't want to overinterpret the sources, right? Sometimes friends just live together. Sometimes people in similar economic circumstances just become roommates, right? That is a thing today, and it was a thing back then. Anyway, to the comments. Yeah, Eddie, welcome to my community. I hope you decide to subscribe and come back for more. There was a lot of roommates that shared a bed in history. I mean, that too, but also, guys, people having their own bed to themselves is a really modern concept. Historically, across many parts in the world, multiple people didn't just sleep in the same room. They slept in the same bed together, not a sexual thing. So that's why I said it's challenging to sometimes find the stories of of, LGBTQ plus people in history, because what we perceive as being, that's clearly a homosexual relationship. It was not. It was just people living the way people did. So I try not to overinterpret the sources, right? Let me see. Now in this era, he must have been very horrible and boring. He sounds pretty boring. I will agree with that. Raphael, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Love the compliment. Okay, great. So she basically tells this man, therefore, I tell you once again, to live secured from all offense to holy saints, and not to injure their feasts, fast, vigils, and other ceremonious seasons. Here is my demorance, here's where I will stay, and from hence I purpose not to part. Right? Now, our judge was now in woeful perplexity and confessing his folly in marrying a wife so young and far unfit for his age and ability, right? He finally admits to himself his own mistake, that he should never have married someone who is so much younger and more energetic than he was, that if he wanted companionship, which is fair, he should have sought a widow more in his own age bracket and more to his complexion, as Bartolomea notes, right? Being half desperate, sad and displeased, he came forth of the chamber, using divers speeches to Pagamino, whereof he made little or no account at all, and in the end, without any other success, left his wife there and returned home to Pisa. And now this is where the story gets a little dark. Not for Bartolomea. She seems to have a happy ending with her dread pirate Pagamino, right? By the way, hashtag dread pirate Pagamino. I'd like to spread that hashtag going forward. This is where it really becomes clear that this story is a cautionary tale against elderly men marrying women who are far too young for them, that it's not appropriate, which also puts a lie to, again, that myth, that bullshit myth, that malodorous myth of bovine fecal matter, that in medieval society, old men married teenagers and little girls all the time, and that it was the way, it was the norm, it was socially acceptable. No, there was absolutely an acceptable difference in age. Mostly it was older men marrying younger women, but sometimes it was older women marrying younger men. Catherine of Aragon was older than Henry VIII, right? And sometimes that age difference would be 10 to 15 years, absolutely. But it was not common for 20, 30, 40 plus year age differences. That was not common. And it was clearly, at least in 14th century Italy, not really that acceptable. And this collection of works, Il Decameron, becomes massively popular all across Europe. It gets translated everywhere. In multiple languages. It appears in multiple libraries, in multiple gorgeous manuscript forms. So clearly these stories are relatable beyond just Italy, right? So keep that in mind when people argue about, well, those stories just reflect local culture. They wouldn't become popular if they only reflected local culture and local sensibilities, if they weren't also relatable to people in other parts of Europe as well. Oh, it's a pudgy baby. Oh, it's a pudgy baby. It's a pudgy baby.
Hello.
Yeah, this is Nabi. She is our rescue baby from last summer. You're almost 2 years ago. Dear God, almost 2 years ago. Yeah, this is Nabi. If you like kitties, I have a Kitties of the Palace channel. We live stream the babies on a pretty regular basis. Oh, handsome. She doesn't want me to put her down. Come and become the kitty tree, please. Yeah, she likes us to just hold her like a living tree. See? Yeah, she likes humans to act like a living tree. Anyway.
She's purring.
She's purring. She's super happy right now. I know, Chini's over there too. Yeah. Okay, so Pagamino goes home, and there he suffers a bad ending, because Further afflictions befall him when he goes home to Pisa. People begin to scorn him. Every day they're asking what has become of his gallant young wife. Again, this emphasis on she's energetic, she's young, she's not an appropriate match for him. Making horns, which tells us that everyone knows basically that she's now living with another man and that he's a cuckold, right? With ridiculous pointings at him, right? Rude hand gestures in his direction, whereby his senses became distracted. So he lost his mind and went raving about the streets, and afterward died in a very miserable manner, right? So maybe it's a little too dark. Maybe it's not quite the fate he deserves, but it's a solid cautionary tale ending there. But then that sadness is capped off by the news came no sooner to the ear of dread pirate Pagamino, but in the honorable affection he bara to Bertolomea, he married her. So she was right. Her dead husband was wrong. He married her with great solemnity, banishing all fasts, vigils, and lents from his house, and living with her in much felicity. The end, right? So it's a very interesting story. Like it's a combination. It's a cautionary tale. There's some adventure. There's some swashbuckling, right? There's a dread pirate Robert's kidnapping, right? It's a very interesting story, and it tells us a lot about how society worked in 14th century Italy, about how people thought, and about the various aspects of society that impacted people on a daily level, and also an awareness. So the other question we had about astrology earlier was how aware was the average person of astrology in the Middle Ages? And it shows that this woman was painfully aware of it. And in fact, she resented it. She resented the intrusion of astrology into her life. And why wouldn't she? Right? Okay. Let's see what we've got here. Must worship the cat. Kitty wants mom, not dad. LMO. Oh no, let me be clear. The cat wanted him. He came home and she silent meowed at him. She does all the time. She's a silent meower, and insisted that he pick her up and be a kitty tree. Yep. Okay. Well, everyone, where are older countesses marrying young men? I'm available. I'll let you know, Haas. Not me, clearly. Okay, so everyone, are there any final questions about our story? We have gone past the 3-hour mark at this point. We will have more medieval story time at some point during the week and again on next weekend. I am heading to Yangdong Mall from Tuesday to Thursday, which is a historic village here in Korea where the houses and homes are still 15th and 16th century homes. People are still living in them. It's a car-free village, and it's absolutely stunning. It is really, truly like stepping back in time. And we're going to be there staying in a 16th century nobleman's home. And we're going to be doing lots of live streaming. A lot of that is going to be from my travels with the Creative Contessa channel. So you're interested in seeing the beautiful cherry blossoms in this historic space and seeing the kind of food and restaurants that are there and getting a tour of that amazing home, then check out my travels with the Creative Contessa channel. I will also be doing some medieval story time and medieval sewing parties, of course, also from Yangdong Mall from this channel. So any final questions or comments? While I give you a chance to make final questions and comments, I would like to thank my patrons on Patreon, my channel members, and my Facebook subscribers for supporting my work by actually giving me money. I would also like to thank people like Mitya Makes, who have generously given me gifts, and my super chatters who come and also throw more money my way. If you had a question and I didn't answer it, I wasn't ignoring you. The live chat moved quickly sometimes. And also I didn't necessarily see everything that people were saying because technology sucks. So if I didn't answer your questions, pop them in the comments under the video when it posts, either on Facebook or YouTube, and I will absolutely check it out and I will answer your questions there. Okay,
Which book was this?
Which book was this? That is That is an excellent question. This was the Decameron, and that's not mirrored. This was the Decameron, Il Decamerone by Giovanni Boccaccio. Specifically, the story was from the second novel on the 10th day, the tale of Ricciardo, Pagamino, and Bartolomea. Right, so this is really lovely. The Easton Press edition is a really lovely version. We find these on A-Books for very little money often. It's leather bound, it's beautifully printed, and this is the early 17th century translation into English by John Florio. Right, it's a very fun translation to read. A lot of the modern translations lack the fun language of this translation, which captures a lot of the nuances of the psychology of the era better than the modern translations do. Oh, Tanya, awesome. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that super chat, Tanya. I think we tagged some copies of the Decameron. Right, so under the shopping bag that is tied to this live stream, it's another way you can support my channel monetarily. I do generally get some kind of commission or kickback if you purchase something from the shopping tab. We tagged copies of the Decameron. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any of the nice leather-bound copies to tag.
One's a 1960 cloth-bound copy, though.
Ooh, one's a 1960 cloth-bound copy, though, so that would be really nice.
Double check.
Is it the John Florio translation? You don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're looking for exactly,
it is not being sold by Walmart,
right.
So I tagged.
Yeah. We don't tag Walmart products, and I only tag products from sellers. I only tag products from sellers that I believe in, and either have used their products or investigated their products somehow. So we don't. Walmart's an evil empire; they can screw right off. So I will never tag products from Walmart. Anyway, any further questions or comments?
Walking with the Contessa. Oh wait, I'm on Walking with the Contessa.
You are.
I just typed on that. I'm signed into the wrong account. On my phone.
Well, that's Walking Contessa, not Travels.
Yeah, no, but somebody asked about the walking.
Oh yeah, Walking with the Contessa. If you click, I do have a Walking with the Contessa channel where I publish full walks recorded in beautiful environments around the world. So if you like to watch walking footage, virtually walk in a beautiful environment, check out Walking with the Contessa. And I think you can just click on the comment that was just made and it'll take you through to the channel.
And if we get 11 more subscribers, we can start doing live streams.
If we get 11 more subscribers on Walking with the Contessa, I can start live streaming the walks, which would be great. But you have to have a certain number. You have to have 50 subscribers before you can actually live stream on YouTube. Anyway, well, everyone, I thank you all so much for joining me. And of course, I also thank all of you who are part of the community, all of you, whether you give me money or not. I appreciate all of you liking and subscribing, leaving comments, being active participants in the live chat, expressing your thoughts and your knowledge. Rosemary, including knowledge from your useless degree, which I think is a useful degree. And sharing your opinions, asking the good questions, and being cheeky and fun with each other as well. So tomorrow I have a medieval cooking party. We will be exploring a May herb cheese savory cheesecake because I have a whole bunch of fresh herbs that I recently bought and I need to use them. I have freshly made cream cheese that I cultured myself this week and I need to use that. So we will be exploring, this is an Italian recipe that we will be exploring together. So if medieval cookery interests you, if you want to know more about the history of food, if you want to understand the process of recreating a medieval dish from an original medieval recipe, the process and the thoughts and intuition and assumptions that entails, then join in tomorrow's medieval cooking party and hit that notification bell on YouTube. And I don't know how it works on Facebook because we might go live randomly some other point this weekend. If it looks like it's going to be a nice day now that the rain has stopped, we might do a live medieval dance practice later on today or tomorrow. Okay, everyone, until next time, may your explorations of history be creative. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone.